The story begins in the cafeteria of Neri Prison Sector 4. The protagonist has just picked up his lunch and sits down with a cold, intimidating expression. Suddenly, another inmate steals a piece of meat from his tray. The protagonist silently stares at it. The inmate mocks him, asking what he's looking at, while hiding behind his larger friend. However, the bully's confidence quickly fades when he realizes the protagonist remains completely unfazed. The larger inmate spits into the protagonist's food, but he still does not react. The inmate continues provoking him, ordering him to eat every bite or face the consequences. The two prisoners keep insulting him, calling him rude before finally labeling him a murderer. That single word ignites tense rage inside the protagonist. He silently vows to take revenge on everyone who framed him and make them suffer the same pain he endured. Without warning, he lunges at the larger inmate. Before anyone can react, he pulls out a sharpened object and it stabs him, causing ketchup to spray everywhere. The inmate barely dodges the attack. The story then flashes back 2 weeks earlier. The protagonist is attending a party with his friend. A girl named Mio Karasawa is singing, and he decides that today he will confess his feeling to her. A few moments later, Mio tells her friend she's going to the restroom. Seeing the perfect opportunity, the protagonist gathers his courage and waits outside for her. When she comes out, he nervously calls her over and confesses that he has liked her for a long time before asking her out. She is completely surprised by the sudden confession. With an awkward smile, she thanks him for his feelings, but gently rejects him, explaining that she is not looking for a boyfriend right now. After apologizing, she walks away, leaving him devastated. He stands there in disbelief, unable to accept that he was rejected by the girl he loved. To drown his frustration, he returns to the party and starts drinking heavily. One can after another, he tries to forget what happened until he eventually passes out at the table while the party continues around him. Hours later, he wakes up confused and wonders where everyone has gone. Still dizzy, he walks outside looking for his friend. Instead, he finds a crime scene. A police officer suddenly grabs him and accuses him of murdering Mio. Terrified and confused, he insists it is impossible and struggles to understand what has happened. In desperation, he looks toward the scene and frees it. Mio's lifeless body lies before him. Unable to believe what he is seeing, he stands in shock. The story then jumps to his trial, where a judge sentences Manabu Tojo to 30 years prison. Mio's family is outraged by the verdict and demands the death penalty, refusing to accept the sentence. Manabu wonders how everything reached this point while her parents scream that the murderer deserves to die. Remembering Mio's smile, he questions whether this is all a nightmare as tears run down his face. He repeatedly swears he is innocent. At that moment, Tojo's father stands up and shouts that his son is innocent and is being treated like a criminal. Mio's mother angrily accuses him of defending a murderer. Soon after, Mio's relatives attack Tojo's father and beat him brutally, while Manabu desperately screams for them to stop. Back in the present, Manabu relives this traumatic memory inside his prison cell. Even while being beaten, his father had told him not to worry, but he would prove innocent. The story shifts to Manabu's arrival at prison. He enters his cell surrounded by dangerous-looking inmates who immediately begin watching him. One of them asks why he is in prison. Frozen with fear, Tojo struggles to answer. A thug punches him from behind and orders him to respond to the cell leader. Through tears, Manabu explains that he did nothing and was framed. Ignoring his words, the cell leader calls him closer. As soon as he approaches, a large inmate kicks him hard in the stomach, sending him crashing into a bed. The leader grabs him by the collar and asks if he is the murderer. Tojo once again denies everything, insisting he is innocent. Another inmate kicks him again, saying he hates people like him, and challenges him to fight back. Seeing his expression, the leader orders the others to tie him up. Manabu struggles and screams for them to let him go, but they overpower him and bind his hands with rope. Annoyed by his resistance, one inmate punches him violently in the stomach. The impact shakes his entire body. Taking advantage of the fact that he is restrained, the other prisoners join in and beat him mercilessly. After the assault, Manabu is completely exhausted and unable to fight back. The cell leader grabs him by the hair, lifts him up, and threatens that if he tells the guards anything, the punishment will be much worse. Manabu says nothing, staring at him with hatred while memorizing every word. Sometime later, a prison guard calls him for a private conversation. The guard delivers devastating news. The previous night, Manabu's parents died in a traffic accident. Completely shocked, Manabu struggles to process what he has just heard. The guard then asks whether he has any other relatives, explaining that prison life will be difficult without any money. The guard repeats the question, fighting back tears, and completely broken, Manabu quietly replies that he has no one left. The guard sighs, saying it was a waste of time expecting anything from him, and that he no longer cares what happens to him. He then leaves with another guard to get something to eat, leaving the protagonist alone with his grief. The story returns to the present as the protagonist picks up his lunch in the prison cafeteria. This time, he sits down with a much colder and more intimidating fresh form. One of the inmates tries to provoke him again by stealing a piece of meat from a tray. The protagonist simply stares at him with a calm, emotionless look. Annoyed by his silence, the thug asks what he's staring at and dares him to do something if he has courage. When the inmates realize he isn't intimidated, one of them spits into his food and threatens him, ordering him to eat every bite or face serious consequence. The two continue mocking him, asking why he's making that face and whether he has any manners. Finally, they call him a murderer. That word unleashes uncontrollable rage inside him. He remembers Mio's rejection and the pain he felt that day. Looking at his ruined meal, he recalls every humiliation he endured, followed by the image of his father being beaten while promised to prove his innocence. His face hardens with anger as he decides he will never remain silent again. He remembers being tied up and beaten without being able to fight back. Wondering why he has suffered so much when he has nothing left to lose, his hand begins to tremble with rage. He realizes that if he dies now, no one will care. The word murderer echoes in his mind, and a dark smile appears on his face. However, he decides he cannot die yet. First, he will take revenge on everyone who framed him. He steps on a pair of disposable chopsticks, breaking them into sharp pieces to use as a weapon. In a single motion, he charges forward, swearing to make everyone suffer the same pain he endured. His face is consumed by rage, and his eyes burn with an uncontrollable desire for revenge. The large inmate is completely caught off guard. The protagonist leaps forward and attacks him with the sharpened chopsticks. Ketchup sprays everywhere as the improvised weapon slices into the inmate's neck. The giant screams in agony while desperately trying to stop the bleeding. His companion panics and calls for help as the injured inmate writhes on the floor. Without hesitation, the protagonist turns toward the remaining prisoners and charges at them, shouting that they should all die. One of the thugs curses at him while the others surround him, but the protagonist refuses to back down. His expression is nothing but pure hatred. One inmate is visibly shaken by his sudden transformation. The protagonist immediately attacks another prisoner, stabbing him in the chest with a broken chopstick. As he fights, he thinks that if he is going to die anyway, he will drag every one of them down with him. The inmate barely has time to scream before collapsing life to the floor. The protagonist immediately attacks another prisoner from behind, striking him in the back of the neck before he can react. The first inmate who mocked him is now terrified, begging him to stop. However, one of the thugs manages to land a punch directly on the protagonist's face. The thug stares at his blood-covered, crazed expression and wonders if he has completely lost his mind. At that moment, the prison guards rush into the cafeteria, shouting and demanding to know what he thinks he's doing. One guard grabs him from behind to restrain him. Furious that the protagonist has caused such chaos, the guard punches him hard. Even while being beaten, the protagonist glares at the guard with overwhelming hatred. The chief guard panics and orders the wounded inmate to be taken to the infirmary immediately, warning that he will deal with everyone else later. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues screaming in rage and frustration. One guard strikes him with a baton, hoping to bring him down, but is shocked when the protagonist keeps moving toward him. The guards quickly realize he is trying to throw himself into the wall. They rush in together and restrain him before he can seriously injure himself. He struggles with all his strength, desperately trying to break free while screaming in fury as they hold him down. The story then moves to the prison infirmary. The protagonist lies silently in bed as the doctor tells a guard that he appears to have lost the will to live because he has refused to eat for several days. The doctor explains that they are giving him nutrients, but his condition remains critical. After the doctor leaves, an elderly janitor quietly enters the room and begins to sweep the floor. Without looking at him, the old man advises the protagonist not to waste life. The protagonist remains lying in bed with an empty stare, showing no interest. The janitor then asks who will clear his parents' names if he dies. Those words immediately catch the protagonist's attention. He sits up and demands to know what the old man means. The janitor reveals that he heard about his case and asks whether he has ever considered that his parents' deaths might not have been an accident. Confused, the protagonist asks what he is trying to say. With a mysterious smile, the old man says their deaths were no accident, they were murdered. Consumed by anger, the protagonist grabs the old man and demands to know how he could possibly know that. The janitor calmly explains that when something feels suspicious, there is usually a hidden truth behind it. He then asks the protagonist one simple question: "Did you kill that girl?" The protagonist immediately lets go of him and firmly denies the accusation. The old man concludes that he was framed and suggests that the real culprit likely murdered his parents after they discovered evidence proving his innocence. The revelation leaves the protagonist speechless. He realizes he had always felt that something about wrong. Now he wonders who was truly behind everything and why they did it. Tears of rage run down his face as he clenches teeth. He shouts that the old man is right and swears he cannot die until he avenges his parents. Satisfied, the janitor smiles after seeing the determination return to the young man's eyes. However, he warns that in his current condition, he stands no chance because Gorik has publicly declared that he intends to kill him. The protagonist remains determined. Impressed by his courage, the old man says he likes that attitude and makes him an offer. If Tojo manages to survive Gorik, he will help him. The protagonist asks how. With a sly smile, the old man reveals his plan. He is going to help him escape from prison. The old man suddenly becomes serious and glances toward the door as if he senses someone approaching. He points to a stack of books and tells the protagonist to read one of them whenever he has the chance because it will be useful. The protagonist picks up the book as the old man turns to leave. Looking at the cover, he realizes it is about human anatomy and the body's weak point. He asks the old man who he is. The old man introduces himself as Isuya, but tells him to simply call him Old Man before quietly leaving the protagonist alone with his thought. Moments later, a guard bursts into the infirmary and angrily asks why he is calmly reading a book after causing so much trouble. Complaining that the entire prison has become a nightmare because of him, the guard orders him to stand up. He drags the protagonist to solitary confinement, telling him that if he wants to die so badly, he can do it there. The heavy cell door slams shut, leaving the protagonist alone in complete darkness. Sitting on the floor, he holds the anatomy book and realizes he no longer wants to die. Staring at the book with determined eyes, he promises himself that he will have revenge. 15 days later, the door to solitary confinement is unlocked. The same guard opens it and shouts that his time is up, telling him to come out if he is still alive. The guard is stunned by what he sees. The protagonist walks out shirtless, revealing a body that is far stronger and more muscular than before. It is obvious that he spent his entire time in solid training. Shocked, the guard asks what he had been doing inside. The protagonist calmly replies that it was nothing special. With a sinister smile, he says he was simply reflecting on his sin. The scene shifts to the prison yard, where the inmates are performing forced labor. The protagonist confidently walks toward the work area when one of Gorik's followers notices him and immediately alerts the other. Within seconds, Gorik's gang surrounds him, threatening that his time is over. The protagonist simply responds with a frightening smile, showing no fear whatsoever. Gorik himself soon arrives, saying he got out of the infirmary early just to find him. Pointing at the scar the protagonist left on him, Gorik swears he will make him suffer 100 times more. With an angry roar, Gorik orders his entire gang to attack. The prisoners rush toward the protagonist all at once. He remains completely calm, effortlessly dodging and blocking every attack. Frustrated, Gorik yells at his men, asking if they have forgotten how to fight and threatening to punish them later if they keep embarrassing him. The protagonist clenches his fists and prepares to strike back. With a loud battle cry, he launches his counterattack. Moving at incredible speed, he begins taking down Gorik's men one after another with precise and devastating blows. Gorik watches in shock and fury before charging at himself. In the middle of the chaos, the protagonist grabs Gorik. With hatred burning in his eyes, he screams for him to die. To everyone's surprise, he lifts the enormous man over his shoulders. Gorik cries out in terror as he is thrown from the upper level. His men scream helplessly as their leader falls from a tremendous height and crashes onto the ground below. The protagonist stands over Gorik's defeated body, exhausted but victorious. He remembers everyone who betrayed him, framed him, and ruined his life. Filled with renewed determination, he swears he will crush every last one of them. Even after defeating Gorik, he continues punching him relentlessly until the prison guards rush in. One guard desperately orders him to stop, warning that if he kills Gorik, he will receive the death penalty. Hearing those words, the protagonist finally stops. He realizes he cannot die before taking revenge on those responsible for destroying his life. Grinding his teeth, he barely manages to suppress the overwhelming hatred inside him. He lets out a scream of pure frustration. From that day on, every inmate realizes they should never provoke the man who no longer faces death. As punishment, the protagonist receives an additional 20 years on his sentence. Despite that, he notices that everyone's attitude toward him has completely changed. Later, he is shown in the infirmary reading the anatomy book again. A guard enters and informs him that Gorik has been transferred to another prison and will spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. The guard asks him not to cause any more trouble before checking whether his injuries have healed. The protagonist replies that he is ready to return cell. As he walks back, he reflects on how every prisoner now avoids him because no one wants to confront a man who is no longer dying. While thinking about this, someone approaches through the hallway. It is Suya. The old man smiles and says they have met again. The protagonist looks at him and reminds him that he survived, just as promised. Now he wants to know how to escape prison. Satisfied, the old man laughs, pleased that the young man kept his word. Suya explains that he can help him escape, but only if the protagonist creates the right opportunity. The protagonist asks what he needs to do. The old man smiles mysteriously, ready to reveal his plan. He tells the protagonist to cause a massive disturbance inside the prison. The protagonist asks what happens afterward and questions whether he can truly trust him. Suya explains that the iron grate covering the kitchen sewer has been loose for a long time and promises to make sure it can be removed when the time comes. After a brief silence, he tells the protagonist to check it himself if he has doubt. The protagonist refuses. He says that if there is a chance to escape, he is willing to do whatever it takes. Looking at the old man with unwavering determination, he tells him to leave everything to him. Shortly afterward, a guard escorts him back to his cell. When he arrives, the other inmates stare at him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. As the guard walks away, the protagonist calmly looks around the cell without showing any weakness. With an intimidating smile, he challenges anyone who wants to avenge Gorik to step forward. One inmate immediately panics and insists it is all a misunderstanding. He quickly explains that they hated Gorik just as much as everyone else. The same inmate continues, saying everyone felt relieved when Tojo defeated Gorik. From that moment on, he declares Tojo the new leader of the cell. The other prisoners immediately agree and begin calling him boss. The protagonist simply watches them with a cold expression, silently accepting his new position. The scene shifts to the prison cafeteria where he eats peacefully while the other inmates treat him with respect. Now recognized as the new leader, he reaches for a piece of meat on his tray. One of the prisoners who used to bully him now respectfully offers him part of his own meal. Soon, the others do the same, trying to please their new boss. Embarrassed, the protagonist tells them to stop because he cannot that much. Meanwhile, at another table, several inmates gossip about how Gorik was defeated by the newcomer and will spend the rest of his life bedridden. A huge inmate overhears the conversation and becomes irritated. He complains that the newcomer became the new leader without even introducing himself. One of his followers tries to calm him down, saying he will talk to the newcomer and convince him to join their side. If that happens, their boss will control the entire prison sector. The man named Misen likes the idea. His subordinate slams his hand on the table, stands up, and walks over to the protagonist. He asks if the man sitting there is the famous Tojo. Then he introduces himself as one of Misan's men and accuses Tojo of disrespecting their boss by failing to introduce himself after defeating Gorik. The protagonist remains calm and coldly asks if that is supposed to be a problem. One of his new followers quietly warns him that Misan is extremely dangerous. The protagonist simply looks across the cafeteria and stares directly at Misan. Noticing the stare, Misan orders one of his men to teach the newcomer some manners. The thug immediately accepts the order. Angered by Tojo's attitude, he slams his fist onto the table and yells that there are rules in this prison and that Tojo is getting too full of himself. Before the man can even finish speaking, Tojo punches him square in the face. Ketchup sprays across the cafeteria as the thug is sent flying backward. The protagonist remains expressionless, his eyes completely cold. Everyone freezes. Misan cannot believe what he just witnessed. Even Tojo's own followers panic after seeing how brutally their new leader reacted. The thug crashes onto the floor and desperately cries out for his boss. Enraged, Misan stands up and begins shouting at the protagonist. Tojo completely ignores him, calmly staring at the defeated man lying on the ground. The rest of the cafeteria falls silent as prisoners stand up, unsure how to react. Some stare at Tojo with pure fear, finally realizing that the newcomer is far more dangerous than anyone expected. Even Misan's own followers hesitate, afraid to step into the fight. Still lying on the floor, the defeated thug points at Tojo and swears he will kill him. Ignoring the threat, Tojo slowly walks toward Misan. Looking down on him with contempt, Misan says he has never met anyone as arrogant as him. Smirking, Tojo replies that now he has. Just then, a guard arrives and orders Misan to stop causing trouble and return to his meal. Misan glares at Tojo with disgust and promises he will regret this. He leaves with his gang, but warns that they will settle everything during tomorrow's recreation period. Meanwhile, the beaten thug remains on the floor crying and calling for his boss. One of Tojo's followers grabs him in panic, saying the situation has become dangerous. Unfazed, Tojo calls them cowards and tells them they simply need to defeat every last one of them. His confidence leaves the entire group speechless. One frightened inmate suddenly drops to his knees, bows before Tojo, apologizes for doubting him, and shouts that they will fight with everything they have the next day. The others immediately agree. Tojo silently watches as his new gang unites and prepares for the battle ahead. Later that night, everyone in the cell is asleep. The protagonist quietly gets up and removes a bedsheet from one of the sleeping inmates. Holding the sheet, he twists it tightly into a thick improvised rope. He grips his homemade weapon with determined eyes, preparing for the chaos he plans to unleash the following day. The next day, during recreation in the prison yard, inmates are scattered around the area while two guards casually patrol nearby. One of Tojo's followers approaches the guards and offers them cigarettes to distract them. The guards gladly accept and walk away together to smoke. Meanwhile, Misan and his gang are already waiting on the opposite side of the yard. Shortly afterward, Tojo and his men begin walking toward them. One of his followers nervously warns that the enemy has arrived. Tojo simply smiles with quiet confidence. Everything is going exactly as he planned. He turns toward his gang and shouts for them to prove their determination. The fight begins instantly. Both gangs charge straight at each other. One inmate lands a heavy punch that sends ketchup flying from his opponent's mouth. Another prisoner is knocked down by a powerful kick. As the brawl intensifies, the distracted guards continue smoking, unaware of what is happening. Finally, one of them notices the chaos, throws away a cigarette, and shouts that another fight has broken out. The violence escalates as more punches send ketchup spraying across the yard. The guards rush over, blowing their whistles in a desperate attempt to regain control. Amid the confusion, even Misan is struck from behind. Grinding his teeth in anger, he realizes someone hit him during the chaos. The situation quickly spirals out of control. One guard is surrounded by inmates, preventing him from using Han. Realizing the prison riot is escalating, he yells that this is a serious violation of prison rules and orders the security team to respond immediately. The fighting continues without mercy. Several prisoners are already lying on the ground while others continue kicking them. Suddenly, the thug who was beaten in the cafeteria notices that something unusual is happening. Amid the chaos, one of the inmates looks around in confusion and wonders where the protagonist has gone. Far away from the fight, the protagonist quietly slips away, carrying the twisted bedsheet he prepared the night before. Moments later, he meets Suya, who praises him for creating the distraction and tells him they need to leave immediately. Smiling with satisfaction, the old man signals for him to follow. Together, they make their way to the prison kitchen to continue their escape plan. When they arrive, Suya stops in front of the sewer grate he mentioned earlier. Without wasting a second, he lifts the heavy iron grate, opening the path to freedom. Satisfied, he looks at the protagonist as if to say that everything went according to plan. The protagonist remains silent, waiting for the right moment. He kneels beside the opening and prepares to enter the dark tunnel below. Inside is a filthy sewer stretching endlessly into darkness. Without hesitation, he climbs down and begins walking through the foul water. Leading the way, the old man warns that the smell is terrible, but tells him to endure it a little longer. The protagonist covers his nose as they continue through the disgusting tunnel. Rats scurry around them, and the sewer is completely infested, but they keep moving forward. After a while, the old man finally stops and announces that they have reached their destination. Another iron grate blocks the exit. The protagonist asks how they are supposed to get past it. The old man calmly explains that he has already prepared everything because he has been there several times before. During one of his earlier visits, he loosened one of the metal bars to make escape easier. Pointing at the loose bar, he tells the protagonist to push it with all his strength. The protagonist does exactly that. To his surprise, the bar comes loose easily, creating an opening large enough to escape. However, just as he is about to leave, the old man suddenly stabs him in the back with a knife. With a sinister smile, Suya drives the blade into his chest without hesitation. He tells the protagonist that his journey ends here and that he has finally granting his wish to die. The powerful stab sends the protagonist collapsing to the ground, unable to fight back. Believing he has won, the old man turns toward the exit to escape alone. Before he can leave, however, the protagonist grabs his leg with the last of his strength. Shocked that he is still alive, the old man loses his balance as the protagonist restrains him from behind. Despite the pain, the protagonist says it was Tsuya himself who taught him to distrust anything that seems suspicious. He reveals that he hid several protective items under his clothes as a precaution. Opening his shirt, he shows that he placed the anatomy book beneath his clothing, allowing it to absorb the knife strike. The old man admits the young man learns quickly. The protagonist angrily declares that he will never trust anyone again. Annoyed, Tsuya mocks him, saying he was the one who taught him that trick, and now it is being used against him. Without hesitation, the protagonist wraps the twisted bedsheet around the old man's neck and begins choking him with all his strength. The old man manages to grab the knife he used earlier. He tosses it into the air and says there is only one chance to win, adding that if he loses, he has only his own naivety to blame. The protagonist remains completely fearless, his eyes filled with rage and nation. Using the twisted sheet, he suddenly throws a white powder into the old man's eye. Blinded, Tsuya cries out pain. Taking advantage of the opening, the protagonist lands a devastating punch face. The old man collapsed, desperately covering his eyes. He realizes it was not just water and wonders when the protagonist prepared the lime. The protagonist reveals that he already knew about the entire plan because someone exposed it to him 2 weeks earlier, warning him about both the knife and the sulfuric acid. The old man is stunned that his trap was discovered and screams that he will drag the protagonist down with him. The protagonist calmly holds up a bottle and asks if this is what he has been looking for. The old man suddenly remembers the moment when the protagonist secretly took something from his bag without him noticing. Furious at being outsmarted, he charges at the protagonist, calling him an insolent fool and insisting he can never defeat him. Before he can attack, the protagonist delivers another crushing punch straight to his face. The old man crashes to the ground, completely defeated. The protagonist follows with a powerful kick, making sure the fight is over. Lying on the ground, the old man admits the protagonist was right and that he was the naive one. Holding the knife, the protagonist walks toward him and coldly says he will never make the same mistake again. The old man bitterly regrets being defeated by him. Without hesitation, the protagonist delivers the final stab, killing him instantly as ketchup sprays everywhere. He then pours sulfuric acid over the old man's face so the body cannot be identified. Without a trace of remorse, he thanks Tsuya for making him stronger. Finally, he crawls through the opening and heads toward the end of the tunnel. Emerging from the sewer, he is greeted by daylight and the sight of the city. He takes a deep breath and enjoys the smell of freedom for the first time in years. Next, he removes the bandages wrapped around his body, revealing that he had hidden pieces of meat beneath them as part of his plan. He throws both the meat and the bandages into the water, eliminating every trace of escape. Now truly free, he prepares to begin the revenge he has been waiting for. The story then shifts to a restaurant where several prison guards are eating. The owner greets them as they sit down. One guard complains that the entire prison is on lockdown because the escaped prisoner has still not been captured. The restaurant owner asks whether there were not supposed to be 2 escapees instead of 1. The guard explains that there were a young man and an old man, but the young man's burned body was found. Sitting quietly at another table, the protagonist overhears the entire conversation with a faint smile. He remembers removing the old man's identification before leaving the tunnel and pouring acid over the body so it would be mistaken for his own. The old man's identification burned together with the body, making the fake death a complete cess. The restaurant owner expresses sympathy for the young man who supposedly died after escaping prison. One of the guards shows no sympathy at all, saying he deserved it because he had been in prison crime. The protagonist quietly continues eating while listening to the guards discuss him. One of the guards claims he deserves everything that happened, but the other interrupts him, saying the accusation may not have been true. He explains that he heard the young man's parents stole the autopsy report in an attempt to prove their son's innocence. Hearing this, the protagonist clenches his teeth as he remembers his parents' sacrifice. He realizes the autopsy report must have contained something important and that his parents were killed because of it. Determined to uncover the truth, he stands up, deciding he must find that report before anyone else. As he walks past the guard's table, one of them calls him over. The protagonist turns toward him with a serious expression. The guard warns him not to wander around because the escaped prisoner is still at large and tells him to report anything suspicious immediately. The protagonist calmly says he understands before walking away. Later that night, a well-dressed man strolls through the streets, casually whistling to himself. Watching from a distance, the protagonist quietly follows him. The man enters a dark alley while wondering what he will eat home. Without warning, the protagonist grabs him from behind, presses a knife against his neck, and orders him not to move. Terrified, the man says he has no money because he is only a part-time worker. The protagonist tells him to be quiet and answer his questions honestly. The man immediately agrees. The protagonist asks who ordered him to frame Tojo. The man looks surprised and asks whether he is also one of Tojo's friends. The word "also" immediately catches the protagonist's attention. He demands an explanation. The man says someone warned him to stay out of the matter unless he wanted to end up with broken arms and legs like Yude Suzuki. Hearing his friend's name, the protagonist remembers the time they spent together and realizes Yude was hurt him. Consumed by rage, he stabs the man's leg, sending ketchup spraying everywhere. As the man screams in pain, the protagonist throws him to the ground and demands to know who attacked Yude. The man suddenly realizes he is facing Tojo himself and begins crying in terror terror. Ignoring his fear, the protagonist demands to know who injured his friend and who forced him to give false testimony. The man refuses, insisting that the mastermind is someone the protagonist could never defeat. Angered by the answer, the protagonist stabs his other leg without hesitation. Giving him one final chance, he asks whether he is going to talk. Terrified of dying, the man finally gives in. He admits he does not know who the mastermind is, but says the person who paid him was a woman named Rei Mano. The name surprises the protagonist. He remembers that Rei was Mio's best friend and that she used to spend time with delinquents outside of school. Filled with hatred, he demands to know where he find her. Begging for his life, the man reveals that Rei works as a hostess at the Grandia nightclub and is probably working there right now. After telling him everything he knows, the man pleads for mercy, claiming he only cooperated because he was threatened. The protagonist ties him up and drags him away while the man desperately begs not killed. He stuffs a gag into his mouth to keep him from calling for help. With a cold expression, the protagonist tells him he is not going to kill him yet and orders him to stay quiet inside the well until everything is over. He then kicks the man into the well without hesitation. Before leaving, he warns that if anything happens to him while searching for Rei Mano, the man should prepare to starve to death down there. With that, he walks away, leaving the man tied up and helpless at the bottom of the well. The story then shifts to a secluded location where the protagonist secretly finds his friend Yud. Hidden nearby, he watches Yud sitting in a chair covered in injuries. Yud sadly says that Tojo died before he could clear his name and calls himself useless. The protagonist watches silently, overwhelmed with guilt for dragging his friend into all of this. He remembers their childhood, when Yud always protected him from school bullies and promised that no one would ever intimidate him again. Sitting beside a campfire, Yud vows to uncover the truth and prove Tojo's innocent. Eventually, the alcohol overwhelms and he collapses drunk beside the fire. Seeing this, the protagonist decides he can no longer involve his friend in his fight. He silently promises to repay everything Yud has done for him. The scene then shifts to the front of the Grandia nightclub where the protagonist patiently waits for his next target. A large man and a woman leave the club together. The woman politely says goodbye to the customer and promises that his next visit will be even better. After the customer leaves, she checks the time and realizes it is time to go home. Without her noticing, the protagonist begins following her through the dark street. Holding a knife, he prepares to confront her and finally uncover the truth. However, his plan is interrupted when she answers a phone call, forcing him to stay hidden. She tells the person on the phone that she has just finished work and is heading to their usual meeting place. The protagonist continues following her through the busy streets, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Eventually, she enters an internet cafe called Net Paradise. The protagonist realizes she is meeting someone there. He suddenly remembers that the cafe is run by a gangster named Hiroto Kagami and concludes that he must be the person she is meeting. Knowing he has little time, he realizes this is his only chance. He enters the building and finds the woman waiting inside a private room, complaining that someone is late. She is stunned when she sees him and immediately asks who he is and how he got inside. With an ironic smile, the protagonist says he is only there to deliver a can of Coca-Cola. He offers her the drink like an ordinary delivery worker. The moment she reaches for it, he grabs her, presses a knife against her neck, and warns her not to make a sound if she wants to stay alive. Looking directly into her eyes, he asks whether she recognizes him. The woman freezes in terror. Stuttering, she says his name and asks if he is really alive. He pins her against the wall and demands to know why she helped frame him. The woman denies being responsible, explaining that she could never afford to bribe 7 witnesses or organize something on that scale. Confused, the protagonist asks who is really behind everything. She tells him to forget everything and run away because the mastermind is untouchable. According to her, if Hiroto arrives, he will never leave that room alive. Frustrated by her hesitation, the protagonist presses the knife harder against her neck, leaving a small cut. With a terrifying look, he gives her one last choice: tell him the truth or die before he does. Terrified, she finally reveals the mastermind's name, Koki Yoshida. The protagonist is stunned. He remembers Koki but cannot understand why he would do something like this. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door, saying that they are waiting inside. Panicking, the woman begs him to stop investigating and leave immediately. The protagonist calmly replies that his parents are dead, his life is already ruined, and the only reason he is still alive is because he has something worth fighting for. He casually says goodbye, even jokingly inviting her to have a drink together someday. As he starts walking away, the woman hurriedly writes some on a paper. Still holding the knife, the protagonist turns back and tells her that revenge is all he has left. He demands that she decide whether she is with him or against him. Desperate, she hands him the paper and asks him to leave, promising to explain everything later. The paper contains her phone number. Taking it, the protagonist warns that he will call her the next day and that if she tries to deceive him, he will show no mercy. He leaves the room and immediately comes face to face with Hiroto Kagami and his men in the hallway. The gang members silently watch him as he walks past. A drop of sweat runs down the protagonist's face, revealing how tense the situation is. The two men stare directly at each other before the protagonist continues walking. As he leaves, Hiroto thinks he has seen that face somewhere before. Back inside the room, Hiroto notices the cut on Rei's neck and asks what happened. She calmly lies, saying her necklace got caught on something. Later that night, the protagonist lies in his room, replaying everything in his mind. He remembers the party and seeing Koki Yoshida talking closely with Mio. He recalls Mio and Rei singing karaoke together and happily enjoying themselves. He also remembers how devastated he felt after being rejected. Then the most painful memory return. He remembers seeing Koki and Mio walking away hand in hand. The pain overwhelms him once again. Unable to understand why Koki took everything from him, he clenches his fist, tears streaming down his face, and screams Yoshida's name in pure hatred. The following day, the protagonist uses a public telephone to call Rei Mano. As soon as she answers, he tells her to meet him at Riverside Park. That night, she nervously agrees. The story briefly shows Rei trying to hide her anxiety while pretending to enjoy herself elsewhere. Later that evening, she arrives at the deserted park. Suddenly, the protagonist steps out from behind a tree. Without wasting time, he demands to know exactly how his parents died. Rei reveals that his parents obtained the original autopsy report and were preparing to request a new trial. With tears in her eyes, she explains that Koki Yoshida feared the truth would be exposed, so he arranged a fake traffic accident to eliminate them. Hearing this, the memory of his parents' deaths floods back, leaving the protagonist devastated. Rei bursts into tears and desperately apologizes for everything that happened. Consumed by rage, the protagonist slaps her across the face and shouts that apologies mean nothing now. Despite being struck, she says she never expected forgiveness and only wanted to tell the truth as a way of atoning for her action. He grabs her by the collar and demands to know what was written in the autopsy report and how Mio actually died. Fighting back tears, Rei finally reveals the truth. The report found bodily fluids from 3 different men on Mio's body, and none of them belonged to the protagonist. He is completely shocked. Rei continues by explaining that on the night of the incident, Koki Yoshida and his wealthy friends offered Mio money. She willingly went with them because to those men she was nothing more than a toy. Hearing the truth, the protagonist is devastated and says he cannot believe Mio was involved that. Filled with anger, he grabs Rei again and demands to know why they framed him. She explains that because someone died, someone had to take the blame. They used his confession of love to create the perfect story. A rejected young man who murdered the girl after being turned down. Staring at her with hatred, the protagonist asks whether everything she said is really true. Rei reveals that Yoshida threatened her as well. If she refused to cooperate, he promised to kill her. She admits she hates him with all her heart. Clenching his fist, the protagonist swears he will crush Koki Yoshida no matter the cost. Rei warns him that although she knows he no longer fears death, things have changed. After the incident, Koki's father assigned 8 bodyguards to protect him. Half of them are elite martial artists, while the others are former force soldiers. She insists he will never get close to Yoshida and begs him one last time to abandon his revenge and disappear. She says his parents would have wanted him to keep living. The protagonist remains unmoved. He tells her he will spare her life for now because she told him the truth, but warns her not to interfere with what he is about to do. He then tells her to come with him, and they leave the park together. While they walk, he explains that he cannot let her go free until everything is over, just to be safe. After stopping, he tells her to hand over her smartphone. She immediately obeys. The moment she gives him the phone, he knocks her unconscious with a precise strike. The story then shifts to the bottom of the well, where Rei wakes up. Even though she believes she deserves her punishment, she begs the protagonist not to die. Standing above the well, he coldly replies that if he dies, she can starve to death there alongside the other men. Inside the well, Rei quietly sits beside him, accepting her punishment. The scene then moves to a nightclub where Koki Yoshida is dancing on stage with a young woman. The protagonist is also inside the club, watching his target from a distance with cold determination and burning hatred. He slowly begins walking toward the stage, where Yoshida is surrounded by his bodyguards. Meanwhile, Yoshida whispers something into the woman's ear and invites her to the restroom. She teasingly calls him bold for suggesting it there, and the two prepare to leave. Before walking away, Yoshida orders his bodyguards not to follow him. Watching everything from a distance, the protagonist realizes the opportunity he has been waiting for has finally arrived. Our protagonist realizes this is his chance and decides it's worth taking the risk, even with one of the bodyguards watch close. As he tries to follow Coke, a bodyguard immediately stops him. Looking him in the eye, the protagonist calmly asks if he isn't even allowed to the restroom. The guard studies him suspiciously, trying to determine whether he's a threat. After a tense pause, he finally lets him pass. Inside the restroom, the protagonist hears Coke and the girl calling for help from one of the stalls. He quietly approaches the door, preparing to strike. Hearing the footsteps, Coke asks who's there and tells them not to interrupt. Without hesitation, the protagonist kicks the stall door open and charges at him. The girl is terrified by the sudden attack. Annoyed by the interruption, Coke demands to know who he is and whether he has a death wish. Filled with rage, the protagonist lunges forward with a knife. However, Koki Yoshida narrowly blocks the attack, while the frightened girl screams after suffering a cut to her neck. Furious, Coke asks what he thinks he's doing. Unfazed, the protagonist lands a powerful punch squarely on Coke's face. Coke fights back by grabbing him by the throat, but the protagonist presses the knife against his neck. At that moment, Coke finally recognizes him and stammers his name in complete shock. The bodyguards rush into the restroom, and Coke orders them to seize him immediately. Outnumbered, the protagonist uses a toilet as a step and leaps over the partition, catching one of the guards completely off guard. He lands on the other side and sprints toward the window. Without hesitation, he crashes through the glass and escapes. Watching through the shattered window, Coke offers a reward of 2 million to whoever captures him. Motivated by the reward, the bodyguards jump out after him. The chase continues through the dark streets as the protagonist runs as fast as he can. The guards shout for him to stop, but he ignores them and keeps running. Eventually, they lose sight of him, and one of them suggests searching farther ahead, unaware that he's hiding nearby. Once they leave, the the protagonist emerges from a pile of garbage bags gripping his knife in frustration, he realizes how close he came to succeeding and that his identity has now been exposed. Even so, he refuses to give up and vows to find another opportunity for revenge. The scene shifts to the city, showing time passing. A luxury car pulls up in front of an upscale building. Inside a lavish apartment, Koki Anita asks his men if they're certain the attacker was Manepu Tojo. Enraged, he confirms it himself and orders them to capture him at any cost, declaring that he'll kill the protagonist with his own hand. The story then returns to the well where the protagonist's hostages are being held. Rei Amo and the other man are exhausted, and the man complains that he's so thirsty he feels like he's going to die. Suddenly, a rope is lowered into the well and both of them look up in alarm. The protagonist climbs down carrying a bag of supplies. Seeing him, Rei weakly asks whether he managed to kill Yoshida. Looking disappointed, the protagonist admits that he ruined everything. The other hostage crawls toward him, begging for water and saying he's about to die. The protagonist throws the bag onto the ground, revealing bottles of water and food. Desperate, the man drinks an entire bottle in one go, relieved to finally quench his thirst. Moments later, Rei Amo's phone starts ringing. The protagonist notices that the caller is Kokoshida. He signals both hostages to stay silent and threatens them not to make a sound before answering the call. On the other end, Coke angrily demands to know where Rei Amo is. The protagonist remains silent, making him even more nervous. After a brief pause, Coke realizes Rei is with Tojo and the protagonist confirms it. He then taunts Coke, saying that they've finally reunited, asking why he ran away so quickly, and even offering to send a car so they can meet. Mocking him, Coke claims he's willing to let him go and reveals that Yuri Suzuki is also with him, inviting the protagonist to join them. Hearing this, the protagonist explodes in anger, shouting that this is between the two of them and that Yuri has nothing to do with it. With a smug smile, Coke asks if he'll surrender in exchange for Yuri's freedom. The protagonist counters by revealing that Azuma and Amando are with him and proposes a hostage for Yuri. Coke laughs off the off, calling him an idiot and saying the lives of those two mean nothing to him. Realizing the negotiation has failed, the protagonist falls silent for a moment before revealing that a copy of the autopsy report still exists. Coke initially dismisses it as a bluff, but when the threat seems convincing, his expression turns serious. He asks what the protagonist wants in return. The protagonist demands that Coke clear his name because he still doesn't want to die. He admits that he originally intended to kill Coke with his own hand. Coke agrees to the deal, promising to use his father's connections to stop anyone from suing him. He even offers him money to disappear from the city. The protagonist remains silent while Rei Amo carefully watches Seishin. He finally agrees to the meeting and tells Coke to send the location, saying they'll meet the following day. He ends the call and prepares for what's coming next. After hearing the plan, Rei and the other hostage panic, warning him that it's obviously a trap. The protagonist calmly replies that he already knows but has no other choice. He tells them that he may not return from the meeting, so they're free to do whatever they want. He then throws the phone onto the ground. Rei desperately grabs him, reminding him that he doesn't even have the copy of the report and that he'll certainly be killed. The protagonist pulls away and says he can't drag Yuri into this any longer. This is his last chance. The scene then cuts to the protagonist preparing for the meeting. He visits a clothing store and picks out new clothes. Later, he walks through a market where a chef can be heard frantically asking if anyone has kitchen knife. He also stops by a convenience store and asks the clerk to gift wrap 2 bottles of whiskey. Finally, the scene shifts to an abandoned building. Inside the abandoned building, the protagonist sits beside a small campfire with the knives and bottles of whiskey he bought, preparing for the final confrontation. He carefully wraps bandages around his hands, getting ready for the fight ahead. Kneeling before the fire with unwavering determination, he lowers his head to the ground in a gesture of respect. He bows deeply as the city lights shine in the distance. Rising to his feet, he asks his parents to watch over him as he faces Yoshida and promises that once he has his revenge, he will join them. He then turns toward the snow-covered city, ready for his final battle. Soon after, Coke's bodyguards report that the protagonist has arrived. One of them shouts in shock that the bastard axe showed up. The protagonist slowly walks toward them while Koki Yoshida watches from above with a smug smile. Turning to his men, he orders them to make sure the protagonist doesn't leave alive that night. They immediately agree. At his command, one of the bodyguards attacks the protagonist from behind, but he dodges the strike and quickly finds himself surrounded by the others as Coke watches from above. Filled with anger, the protagonist shouts for Coke to come down and face. Coke mocks him, saying it must be cold outside and invites him inside to talk. Inside the mansion, even more bodyguards are waiting. The protagonist demands that Yuri be released first or he'll leave immediately. Smirking, Coke signals one of his men, who kicks Yuri out of the mansion and throws him onto the ground. The protagonist rushes over to help his friend while Coke claimed to be a man of his word. One of the bodyguards asks whether releasing Suzuki isn't giving up their advantage over Tojo. Smiling maliciously, Coke explains that Yuri's arms and legs are already ruined and that the protagonist will never escape while carrying dead weight. Seeing his friend alive, alive, Yuri is shocked and asks if Manabu is really alive. Refusing to be a burden, he shouts that he's not a coward and that they'll fight together. Annoyed by the delay, Coke orders them to stop the drama and come inside. Yuri tries to stop the protagonist from entering, warning him that the mansion is filled with armed men and that he'll never make it out alive. The protagonist has no choice but to tell Yoshida to spare his friend because he's entering the mansion. However, Yuri refuses to leave, insisting he'll stay and help settle everything. The protagonist says goodbye, asking Yuri to live a good life and visit his grave from time to time. As the guards drag Yuri away, the protagonist watches with unwavering determination before turning around and entering the mansion, where the remaining bodyguards are already waiting. Inside, Koki Yoshida walks down the stairs with an arrogant grin. The protagonist notices dozens of blades scattered across the floor, deliberately placed there to intimidate him. Rage fills his body, and his eyes glow red as he stares down his enemy. In the main hall, he finds himself completely surrounded by Yoshida's men. Standing at the top of the staircase, Coke asks whether he brought what he promised. The protagonist calls him an idiot and asks if he really believes he'd bring something that important to a trap. Irritated, Coke orders him to stop waste time and asks if he honestly thinks empty threats will scare him. At his signal, the bodyguards raise their weapons and prepare to attack. Instead, the protagonist surprises everyone by raising a bottle of whiskey and telling them to relax because he brought them a drink. Completely confused, Coke asks if it's supposed to be a gift. The protagonist then reveals both bottles, quietly setting up his next move. Suddenly, someone arrives at the mansion, and everyone turns toward the entrance. To everyone's surprise, Kokoshida's father walks in with his own men. Coke is stunned and asks what his father is doing there. With a cold expression, his father replies that he's there to clean up the mess son created. Moments later, his men drag in Yuri and Azuma, both tied up and gagged. The protagonist is shocked to see they have been captured and can only watch helplessly. Coke's father scolds his son, telling him that if he's going to do something, he should do it properly. Coke asks whether he intends to eliminate everyone involved, pointing out that Rei Amo is on their side. His father calls him naive and asks if he really believes Rei is loyal. He reveals that Rei was the one who leaked the autopsy report to Tojo's parents. Rei glares at him with hatred while the protagonist left speechless by the revelation. Realizing the betrayal, Coke angrily slaps Rei across the face, accusing her of betraying him after all the money he gave her. Rei stands back up and shouts that she may sleep with anyone she wants, but unlike him, her heart isn't rotten. She says she couldn't bear watching Tojo's parents desperately searching for witnesses any longer. Enraged, Coke kicks her to the ground, orders her to shut up, and swears he'll bury her alongside Tojo once he's finished with him. At that moment, Coke's father approaches the protagonist and coldly asks if he's Manabu Tojo. The protagonist replies that everything he suffered happened because of him and says he knows exactly what kind of monster he is. With a smug smile, the old man says he doesn't bother remembering people he considers less than insect. Getting straight to the point, he demands to know where the copy of the autopsy report is. The protagonist smiles defiantly and says he'll never tell him. Unmoved, the old man signals his men to prepare for battle. He boasts that the forces backing him are beyond the protagonist's imagination and says it doesn't matter where the report is hidden. Looking down on him with contempt, he declares that once the protagonist is dead, everything will be over. Before giving the final order, the old man turns back with a sinister smile and says there's one more thing you should know. Pointing at his men, he reveals that they were the ones who murdered the protagonist's parents. Hearing those words, the protagonist is consumed by uncontrollable rage. The veins in his neck bulge as he clenches trembling fists. Letting out a furious roar, he screams Yoshida's name and prepares for the most important battle of his life. The protagonist shouts that even an insect will fight back when cornered and promises to show them what real pain feels like. He then smashes the whiskey bottles on the floor, covering the ground with liquid. One of the bodyguards immediately slips, crashing to the floor in pain. Unable to keep his footing on the slick surface, he struggles to get back up. Taking advantage of the opening, the protagonist rushes forward and kills one of the guards with a precise strike. Watching the scene unfold, Coke and his father panic as they realize the liquid covering the floor is actually oil. The old man calls him a coward. Without slowing down, the protagonist charges his next target and slashes his neck without mercy, taking another guard out of the fight as blood sprays everywhere. Desperate, Coke orders his men to stop him, knowing he can't handle the situation himself. The remaining bodyguards rush in, but the protagonist doesn't hesitate. He knocks one of them down with a powerful kick, then uses the fallen guard's body as a stepping stone to launch a flying attack against another opponent. Landing smoothly, he grips a knife in each hand and prepares for the next assault. Annoyed by his performance, Coke calls him a show-off and orders his men to finish him. As the guards charge, the protagonist reveals another trick. Bringing his hands together, he releases a cloud of white powder that blinds everyone around him. With his enemies disoriented, he tightens his grip on his knives and disappears into the cloud like a predator stalking its prey. Before anyone notices, he strikes the first guard from behind, sending blood flying everywhere. Covered in blood, he looks like a demon in the middle of the chaos. The blinded guards desperately rub their eyes, unable to see. Exploiting their confusion, the protagonist finishes off another opponent with a fatal blow. The remaining thugs panic and begin swinging their weapons wildly through the dust while he moves swiftly among them, taking them down one after another. Watching his men fall so easily, Coke becomes increasingly frustrated. His father, however, quickly understands the protagonist's strategy and orders Coke to grab the alcohol. well. Smiling confidently, Coke remembers that while water won't remove the powder, alcohol will. Suddenly, Rei Amo throws herself at Coke's feet and grabs his legs, preventing him from moving. Furious, he yells at her to let go before violently kicking her away. Even while injured on the floor, Rei believes it's the least she can do to help. Thanks to the delay, the guards finally manage to clear the powder from their eyes by pouring alcohol over faces. Once their vision returns, Coke's father tells them to stay calm, insisting that the protagonist is still an easy target. The remaining guards advance more cautiously. One of them jumps in with an aerial attack, but the protagonist lore. Seeing him occupied, Coke's father orders everyone else to attack at once. As the guards close in, Yuri suddenly gets back on his feet. With a furious shout, he grabs one of the bodyguards from behind. The guard responds with a powerful headbutt before raising his knife to kill Yuri. Before he can strike, the protagonist breaks free, grabs the guard by the head, and slams it into the edge of the staircase with all his strength. Furious at the interruption, Coke yells that they should have killed Yuri first. The protagonist gets back up, dodges another attack, and lands a solid punch on one of the guards. It becomes clear that he has strapped a metal blade to his forearm, allowing him to defend and attack at this time. Using this improvised weapon, he overwhelms the remaining guards one after another. Lying on the floor, Yuri taunts Coke, shouting that he isn't afraid of him. Coke angrily replies that he'll kill him first. The protagonist is stabbed in the back but refuses stop. Throwing his jacket at his opponents to distract them, he creates another opening and takes down several more guards. With most of his enemies defeated, he pulls out a lighter and asks if anyone needs a light. The surviving guards stare at him in confusion. He drops the lighter onto the floor, instantly igniting the oil spread across the room. Flames erupt everywhere, turning the remaining guards into human torches. Using the chaos as cover, Coke rushes toward Yuri, but the protagonist is faster. He slashes Coke across the back with his machete, sending him crashing to the floor as blood splatters everywhere. Defeated and unable to believe what has happened, Coke wonders how everything fell apart so completely. The protagonist steps on his face and raises his weapon, preparing to deliver the final blow. Coldly, he asks if Coke has any last words. Before he can finish him, Coke's father grabs Rei and holds a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her if his son is harmed. Despite the threat, the protagonist remains calm and dares him to do it while Coke desperately begs for his life. Terrified, Coke pleads for forgiveness, promising to clear the protagonist's name and pay him whatever he wants if he's allowed to live. His father also proposes ending everything there without further bloodshed, warning that if his son dies, he will show no mercy. The protagonist stares at him with a cold expression and asks whether he really looks afraid of dying. Coke's father changes tactics, reminding him that he may not care about his own life, but what about Yuri's? He orders his men to kill everyone and blame the protagonist for the massacre. Without losing his composure, the protagonist looks at Yuri, then back at Coke, and demands all of his money. Surprised by the request, Coke says he also has gold bars and offers to retrieve them immediately. As Coke walks upstairs, he secretly thinks about the gun hidden inside the safe and vows that the protagonist will pay for everything. Meanwhile, his father tells the protagonist to take the money and leave, insisting they'll be even. The protagonist ignores him and silently fixes his gaze on Rei Amo. In one swift motion, Rei throws herself at Coke's father and grabs hold of him with all her strength. Seizing the opportunity, the protagonist grabs the knife lying on the floor. Driven by pure rage, he rushes toward the old man, grabs his head and slashes his throat without hesitation. Blood sprays everywhere as Coke's father collapses life to the ground. Rei Amo also falls to the floor, completely exhausted but relieved. The protagonist walks over, helps her up, and she immediately warns him that there are still guns inside the house. At that moment, Coke appears at the top of the staircase holding a gun. Carrying a bag full of cash, he swears he'll send them all to the afterlife, claiming he brought what he promised. However, as he reaches the first floor, he freezes after seeing all of his men and his father dead. Furious, he accuses Tojo of breaking their agreement and demands that he show himself. Suddenly, he hears Tojo's voice coming from behind a folding screen and immediately opens fire. In a fit of rage, he empties the entire magazine toward the sound. Only then does he realize he is tricked. The voice was coming from a phone left on the floor. The phone he had taken from Rei had been set to play a recording of Tojo's voice, leaving him with an empty gun and completely defenseless. The protagonist appears from behind and slashes Coke's arm, sending blood flying. He follows with a powerful kick that knocks him to the ground before pinning him down with all his strength. Terrified, Coke screams and asks why he killed his father. With a cold smile, the protagonist replies that he promised to wipe out his entire family and always finishes what he starts. He asks how else he could face his own parents in the afterlife. Without another word, he drives the knife into Coke's neck, killing him. His final enemy falls lifeless to the floor, and the bloodstained knife lands beside the body. With tears in his eyes, the protagonist cries out that he has finally avenged his parents. In the background, Yuri and Rei silently watch the scene, trying to process everything that has happened. Once the battle is over, Rei helps Yuri to his feet, and the two support each other. The protagonist turns to them and tells Rei to take Yuri and leave because he still has something to do. He then goes upstairs and finds a safe filled with cash and gold bars. Among the fortune, he discovers a white envelope. Opening it, he realizes it contains the original autopsy report. Outside, Yuri and Rei wait as snow begins to fall, anxiously watching the mansion. A few moments later, the protagonist walks out carrying the bag of money. He hands it to them, explaining that it contains 40 million in cash along with several gold bars. He tells them to split everything and disappear without contact anyone. Speechless, Rei says she's sorry for betraying him, but the protagonist interrupts her. Calmly, he says she was being threatened as well and that it's time to let let go of the past. Yuri asks whether he's coming with them. Looking exhausted, the protagonist replies that he can't keep running anymore. Yuri refuses to leave him behind, insisting he'll stay with him even if it prison or the death panel. The protagonist reassures him, saying he has a plan and that even if it fails, he won't drag them into it. Realizing what he intends to do, Rei is left speechless. Holding the autopsy report, the protagonist asks them to give him just one night to settle everything and promises he'll come back alive. As Rei tries to follow him, Yuri stops her, saying they can't let him carry everything alone. Then he realizes following him would only get in the way. He tells Rei that all they can do now is trust Manabu. The two finally leave, while the protagonist watches them disappear with a determined expression. The scene then cuts to a man lying on the ground as another person drags him away. Later, Yuri and Rei hide beneath a bridge. Yuri asks what is inside the envelope. Rei explains that it most likely contains documents proving the corruption of some of the city's most powerful figures. Confused, Yuri asks why something like that would be inside Yoshida's house. Rei reveals that Yoshida's father had been the deputy chief of the Nariri police department, making it easy for him to obtain those documents. As she speaks, the image of Koke's father holding the files emphasizes his influence and authority. The two remain silent for a moment before Rei concludes that those documents were exactly why power protected him and allowed him to do whatever he wanted in the city. Yuri panics, realizing that if Manabu confronts those influential figures alone, he'll almost certainly be killed. He immediately decides to go after. Rei stops him, asking him to calm down because she believes Manabu's plan actually has a seed. Yuri asks why she thinks so. She explains that, to those powerful men, Yoshida had become nothing more than a liability, someone they wanted gone. Therefore, Manabu's only chance of surviving is to form an alliance with them. The scene shifts elsewhere, where the protagonist studies a compromising photograph of one of the city's powerful leaders. With a serious expression, he puts the photo away, preparing for one final confrontation. Soon afterward, he walks toward an enormous mansion. In the middle of the night, he climbs the long staircase carrying a mysterious bag. At the top, several guards block the entrance. They immediately stop him, saying the area is restricted, but the protagonist demands to see Mr. Goda. One of the guards dismisses him, saying the boss is already resting and telling him to come back the next day if he has business. The protagonist firmly insists that the matter must be settled tonight. Annoyed by his persistence, the guard narrows his eyes and asks if he has a death wish. Ignoring the threat, the protagonist quietly unzips his bag. In one swift motion, he turns it upside down and dumps its contents onto the ground in front of everyone. Shocked by what they see, the guards ask what he's trying to do. The protagonist calmly reveals the contents of the bag and tells them to inform Mr. Goda that Yoshida has already been taken care of. Horrified by the gruesome sight, the guard immediately agrees and asks him to wait. About 2 minutes later, a voice from inside the mansion grants him permission to enter. He walks through the courtyard where more bodyguards escort him to the main hall. Inside, he finds Mr. Goda sitting calmly while a woman serves him tea. The crime boss casually picks up his teacup, showing no concern about the situation. Looking at the protagonist, he asks if he is Tojo. Surprised, the protagonist asks how Mr. Goda already knows who he is. The crime boss reveals that Yoshida had borrowed some of his men to eliminate Tojo. Slamming his hand on the table, he angrily asks how the protagonist has the nerve to ask for help after killing his men. Completely surrounded by the boss's bodyguards, the protagonist remains calm. He challenges the boss, saying that if he truly cared about those men, he should kill him right there. Impressed by his courage, the boss calls him interesting and asks him to give a reason to keep him alive. The protagonist takes out the white envelope and asks if it is enough. Smiling, the woman steps forward, takes the envelope from him, and hands it to the boss. After opening it, the boss finds the incriminating photograph the protagonist had recovered. Unfazed, he asks whether the protagonist really believes something like that can threaten him. The protagonist replies that it may not matter to him personally, but it will certainly matter to the people above him. Looking him straight in the eye, the protagonist asks if he knows how many people he had to kill that day alone. The boss asks whether that's supposed to be a threat and reminds him that he's far beneath his level. The protagonist smiles and says it isn't a threat because he has nothing left to lose. He reveals that if he doesn't return before midnight, the rest of the evidence will automatically be delivered to the mobile investigation unit. The boss calmly asks what that has to do with him. The protagonist explains that after killing Yoshida, the last place he was seen was this mansion. If the evidence reaches the city's powerful figures, who do they think will be blamed as the master? Realizing the logic behind those words, the boss falls silent. He finally understands that the protagonist didn't come seeking help. He came to drag him down with him if necessary. The protagonist gives him a choice. If the boss helps him, he can use the evidence to gain even more wealth, and if he refuses, they'll both go down together. The boss bursts into laughter, calling the young man entertaining and saying he reminds him of his young self. Having made his decision, he offers the protagonist a drink to seal the agreement. Without hesitation, the protagonist empties the cup in a single gulp before handing it back to the woman with a smile. The boss agrees to clean up the entire incident, but under one condition. From that day forward, the protagonist will work for him. The protagonist smiles slightly, accepts the offer, bows respectfully, and promises to devote his life serving him. The boss then calls one of his subordinates and orders him to clean up everything related to Yoshida. He also instructs him to contact a man named Tanaka from the investigation unit and make sure he stays out of the matter. The subordinate immediately accepts the order and leaves. Picking up his cane, the boss prepares to leave. Before walking away, he tells the woman to take good care of the protagonist breakfast and make sure he stays at the mansion for the night. The protagonist interrupts him, reminding him that if he doesn't return before midnight. The boss smiles and tells him to stop acting, saying he never intended to release the evidence in the first place. The protagonist smiles back and apologizes for being found out. He is then escorted to a guest room so he can finally get some rest. Inside the room, the woman slowly begins undressing, preparing to seduce him. She gracefully puts on a pair of stockings, sits on the edge of the bathtub, and invites him over, explaining that Mr. Goda instructed her to take good care of him that night. The protagonist calmly approaches her. Instead of accepting her invitation, he gently covers her with a robe. Surprised by the rejection, she stands up to leave. Before walking out, she says she's tired and asks him to leave her alone. After closing the door, she pauses outside for a moment, quietly reflecting on his unexpected reaction. Meanwhile, the protagonist finally enjoys a hot bath after the longest day of life. Later, the woman reports everything to Mr. Goda. She tells him that, just as expected, the young man never even looked at her twice. The boss remarks that the protagonist is clearly no ordinary person. Very few young men his age could suppress their desires so completely. The woman asks whether she should continue watching him closely. The boss agrees, saying someone like him won't be easy to control. Although he's useful, if he ever betrays them, the consequences would be disastrous. For that reason, they must never let their guard down. Instead, they'll gain his trust little by little, waiting until they discover his weakness and use it against him. With a calculating expression, the boss wonders whether turning the protagonist into his pawn is truly safe. The following morning, after everything that happened, the protagonist finally gets some proper rest as the sun rises over the mansion. Suddenly, he wakes up from what appears to be a nightmare. Breathing heavily, he sits upright in bed. To his surprise, the same woman is beside him. She greets him with a warm good morning while gently wiping his face. He thanks her for taking care of him and says he has to leave. Smiling, she stops him and tells him not to rush. She invites him to watch something interesting before turning on the television. The news reports a fire at a house on the outskirts of the city. The protagonist is impressed by how quickly Mr. Goda handled everything, but he notices the report only mentioned 3 victims instead of the other 8 bodyguards. The woman explains that those guards were all wanted fugitives and criminals. No one will care that they died, and their bodies will simply be buried without further investigation. Moving closer, she tells him to stop worrying and enjoy the moment with her. The protagonist gently interrupts and asks for her name. Smiling, she finally introduces herself as Yami Munakata. He apologizes, saying he still has something important to do. Without looking back, he walks away, leaving Yami standing there with a disappointed expression. The scene shifts beneath the bridge where the protagonist reunites with his friends. The moment Rei, Amo, and Yuri see him, they're overwhelmed with relief. With tears in her eyes, Rei runs over and hugs him tightly, crying with joy that he made it back safely. She says she always believed he would survive. The protagonist reassures them both and announces that, starting today, no one will be hunting them anymore. At last, they are finally free. Hearing the news, Rei breaks down in tears of relief and hugs the protagonist even tighter. Yuri also starts crying and asks why she's crying over such good news. As time passes, the 3 move into a new hideout inside an old building. Rei prepares a feast to celebrate their new beginning. Yuri is amazed by the meal and admits he never knew she could cook so well. Smiling, Rei tells him not to underestimate her because she's been living on her own since 8 years old. The 3 raise their glasses and toast to their freedom and a fresh start. They spend the evening eating, drinking, and enjoying their first peaceful moment in a long time. Later, Rei asks Tojo what he plans to do next. He explains that with the money they took from Yoshida's house, they might be able to open a small business. Excited, Yuri jokingly asks if that means they're presidents now. Rei promises she'll support whatever decision Tojo makes. Yuri smiles and asks if she's planning to return to work at the nightclub. Rei reveals that her younger brother suffers from kidney disease. After losing her parents at a young age, she had no choice but to work as a hostess to support them. Thanks to Tojo, she finally feels she has a chance to start over. Moved by her words, Yuri proposes another toast, and everyone gladly joins in. After a while, Yuri falls asleep on the couch from exhaustion. Meanwhile, the protagonist lies awake in bed, lost in thought. A moment later, Rei quietly enters the room and asks if she can stay because she has nowhere else to go. The protagonist gets up and says he'll sleep on the floor since there's only 1 bed and 1 couch. Rei gently stops him by touching his shoulder. She reminds him that his injuries haven't healed yet and says he shouldn't sleep on the floor. Instead, she suggests they share the bed. The 2 lie side by side without touching each other. Meanwhile, Yuri appears to be having a nightmare on the couch. Back in the bedroom, Rei softly confesses that she's actually had feelings for him ever since they were in school. However, the protagonist has already fallen asleep and never hears her confession. The following morning, the protagonist and Yuri walk through the streets together. Yuri asks whether Rei is going to live with them. The protagonist confirms that she is because she has nowhere else to go. He also says they'll need to buy another bed. Yuri smiles, saying that with the money they recovered from Yoshida's house, the 3 of them will be able to live comfortably for quite some time. Suddenly, a group of heavily tattooed thugs blocks their path. One of them looks at the pair and asks his men if these are the guys they're looking for. Yuri immediately becomes nervous and quietly asks Tojo if he knows them. Deciding it's better not to get involved, he tries to lead his friend away. Before they can leave, the gang leader stops them and mocks Yuri, saying they clearly didn't beat him badly enough last time. The protagonist stares coldly at the group and asks Yuri if these were the men who broke his arm and legs. Panicking, Yuri immediately denies it and begs him not to start a fight. The gang leader steps forward and threatens Yuri, saying someone named Kuro-san warned him never to show his face in the city again and that he'll beat him every time he does. The atmosphere grows tense as both sides face each other in the middle of the street. The thug then turns to the protagonist and asks if he has a problem. Without a second thought, the protagonist throws a devastating punch straight into the man's face, sending blood spraying everywhere. The impact is so powerful that the gang leader is launched backward before crashing onto the pavement. Barely able to move, he struggles to stand while bleeding heavily. His men rush to help him as he angrily yells at the protagonist, unable to believe what just happened. Ignoring the threats, the protagonist opens his shirt and reveals the scars he earned during his time in prison. The sight leaves the other two thugs visibly shaken. Enraged, the gang leader orders them to attack. The two men charge at the protagonist, but he remains completely calm, wearing a sinister smile as the fight begins. He effortlessly dodges the first punch and counters with a crushing blow to one thug's face. Grabbing him, he unleashes a relentless barrage of punches, covering the area in blood without giving him any chance to fight back. The second thug attempts to attack from behind, but the protagonist reacts instantly. He catches the man's arm and slams him into the ground with overwhelming force. With both of his men defeated, the gang leader is terrified by the protagonist's strength. Trying to surrender, he admits everything was their fault and asks to settle things peacefully. The protagonist ignores him, grabs him, and slams him into the ground with another brutal attack. At that moment, Yuri steps in and tells him to stop. He warns that if someone dies, they'll only create more problems just when their lives have finally become stable. The protagonist lets the man go and warns him that he'll spare him this time, but he won't be so lucky again. The beaten thugs regroup and threaten them, saying they already know where they live. They promise to report everything to their boss and return to finish them off. Yuri explains that their leader serves a man named Kuro-san, the crime boss who controls the arcades and internet cafes throughout the area. He warns that Kuro-san is extremely dangerous. The protagonist places a reassuring hand on Yuri's shoulder. With a confident smile, he tells everyone to prepare for a fight. If they can defeat Kuro-san, the entire district will become theirs. Yuri is shocked by his sudden confidence and thinks his friend has become a completely different person. He warns that Kuro-san will bring countless men, and the two of them won't stand alone. The protagonist agrees and says there are two people he helped in the past who can join them. The scene shifts to an industrial district where they meet their reinforcements. There, they find a rough-looking duo who don't appear very friendly. The protagonist isn't particularly impressed and comments that they don't look very reliable at first glance. Yuri reassures him, explaining that although their fighting skills may not look impressive, they're dependable. One of the two approaches while smoking a cigarette and asks Yuri who their target is. Clenching his fist in anger, Yuri answers that they're going after Kuro-san. The moment they hear the name, both men freeze in shock and ask if he means the Kuro-san. The protagonist explains that Kuro-san's men were the ones who left Yuri in that condition and says he's going to settle the score. He also warns them that Kuro-san will definitely show up with a large group of men. One of the men gets excited and says he's wanted to take down that bastard for a long time. The big guy immediately agrees, saying he's been waiting to hear those words. The protagonist is surprised by their determination. As expected from Yuri's friends, they have far more courage than he imagined. Still, he warns them that courage alone won't be enough for such a small group. Pointing to his head, he tells them they'll have to use their brains if they want to win. The scene cuts to a white van speeding toward the building. Several thugs armed with baseball bats and metal pipes jump out. Moments later, the gang boss arrives and asks if they've found the right place. One of his men confirms the location, explaining that he has been watching them all day. Kuro-san asks how many enemies they're facing. The thug replies that there are only 5 people, but warns him that the man who beat him is a completely insane ex-convict. Kuro-san smirks and says he's been to prison too, so he won't lose when it comes to madness. He immediately orders his men to wipe them out. Inside the building, the protagonist watches the gang approach through the reflection in the window. He and his allies are already in position, waiting for the moment. One ally hiding on top of a shelf signals that everything is ready. The front door is suddenly kicked open, and the gang storms inside, finding the protagonist and his allies waiting for them. The gang boss stares at the protagonist and asks if he's the one who beat up the man. The protagonist calmly affirms it. Grinning, Kuro-san orders everyone to attack, then quickly changes his command and tells his men to focus on the protagonist first. The thugs charge forward with their bats raised. At that moment, the ally hiding above dumps a bucket of quicklime onto them, covering the gang in white powder and leaving them completely disoriented. Furious, Kuro-san realizes it's quicklime and orders his men to bring down whoever threw it. One thug climbs onto the shelf, but the ally greets him with a smile before sending him flying with a powerful kick. Smiling confidently, he pulls a rope to trigger the next stage of the plan. A large container of water pours down above, soaking the gang. The water reacts with the quicklime, burning their skin and throwing them in chaos. Enraged, Kuro-san calls them cowards for relying on dirty tricks. As confusion spreads, the protagonist seizes the opportunity to grab one of the thugs. He twists the man's arm with all his strength, making him scream in pain. The gang leader angrily complains that they're fighting unfairly. The protagonist calmly replies that they don't believe in an eye for an eye. Without wasting another second, he finishes the thug with a crushing kick that sends him crashing into a wall. With every thug defeated, the protagonist stands alone in the middle of the room. Furious, Kuro-san calls him a coward and swears he'll kill him with his own hands. The protagonist tears off his shirt and boldly challenges him, declaring that he'll defeat every one of them by himself. Impressed by his confidence, Kuro-san accepts a one-on-one fight. He also tears off his shirt, revealing his muscular build build and tattoo-covered body. The two stand face to face in the center of the room, preparing for the decisive battle. Kuro-san throws a powerful punch, but the protagonist narrowly dodges it before countering with a devastating kick that sends his opponent flying. Even after hitting the ground, Kuro-san grabs the protagonist's wrist with incredible strength. The protagonist struggles to break free, but Kuro-san is much stronger than expected. Taking advantage of his grip, Kuro-san locks him in a chokehold from behind. The protagonist's friends try to interfere, but Kuro-san yells at them to stay out of it because this fight belongs to him alone. Watching nervously, Rei thinks that if Tojo truly wants to rule this territory, he has to win with his own strength. With a crazed look in his eyes, Kuro-san tightens the chokehold and shouts that he'll send them all to hell. The protagonist grits his teeth in pain and fights to stay conscious as the air leaves his lung. At that moment, memories of his friends flash through his mind, and he refuses to loot. Watching from a distance, Yuri anxiously asks Rei if they're really not going to call for help. Meanwhile, Kuro-san squeezes even harder and mocks the protagonist, saying a weakling like him could never win. Planting his feet firmly on the ground, the protagonist gathers every ounce strength he has. With an explosive movement, he throws himself backward, slamming Kuro-san into the ground before immediately launching another attack. He swings a powerful punch, but Kuro-san blocks it with his forearm and glares at him with burning rage. Smirking, Kuro-san asks if that's the best he can do. Fueled by anger, the protagonist lets out a roar and prepares to unleash everything he has. He suddenly drives his head straight into Kuro-san's face, sending blood spraying everywhere. Even while bleeding, Kuro-san grins wildly and challenges him to see which of them will fall first. The protagonist is injured as well, but his determination never wavers. The two grab hold of each other once again and exchange another brutal clash. With all their strength, they slam their foreheads together in a devastating headbutt. The impact makes the protagonist spit blood, but Kuro-san takes the worst of it and staggers in a daze. Watching in disbelief, one of Yuri's friends asks if the boss has finally passed out. Completely stunned, Kuro-san can barely stay on his feet as the protagonist grabs him by the chin. Moments later, Kuro-san collapses to his knees, utterly defeated. Yuri's friends stare in amazement, realizing just how strong the protagonist really is. Even after losing, Kuro-san angrily orders his remaining men to attack. Yuri steps in front of them and declares that they won't get past him. Rei also intervenes, shouting that the fight is already over. Standing over his defeated opponent, the protagonist looks down at him with a cold, victorious expression. He tells Kuro-san that he lost and that their score has finally settled. However, he adds that Kuro-san still hasn't paid for what his men did to Yuri. With anger blazing in his eyes, our hero charges forward and delivers a merciless kick to the boss. The impact is so powerful that Kuro-san is launched backward, crashing hard onto his back. He cries out in pain from the devastating blow. At that moment, one of the thugs panics and shouts that they've gone too far because he already called his cousin from the investigation unit. Unfazed, our protagonist stares him down and calmly says he'll wait right there. Hearing this, Yin's friends panic. They realize the rumors were true and beg everyone to run before they all get arrested. Ignoring the chaos, our hero calmly picks up his shirt, puts it on, and tells them to relax because no one is going to jail. They'll simply wait for the police to arrive. One of Yuri's friends isn't convinced and says they're in serious trouble. Yuri places a hand on his shoulder and tells him to stay calm and trust friend. Moments later, footsteps approach the warehouse. To everyone's surprise, the investigation unit arrives and its leader asks what happened. The thug immediately points at our hero's group and lies, claiming they started the fight, and even said they weren't afraid of the police. His cousin walks up to our protagonist and threatens him, saying he has a lot of nerve for laying a hand on Kuro-san and his family. At that moment, our hero realizes this is why Kuro-san had been acting so arrogantly. The officer tells him it's too late to understand that now, and says he'll regret his stupidity for the rest of life. Despite his bloodied face, our protagonist looks him in the eye and coldly asks if he really has that much authority. The officer smirks and says no one has ever spoken to him like that because in this area, he is the law. One of the thugs urges the officer to punch him before throwing him into a cell. The officer mocks our protagonist and reminds him of his earlier claim that someone would be on their knees within 5 minutes. Our hero quietly wonders whether Gorda has no intention of saving him or is simply using the situation to squeeze everything he can out of him. Growing impatient, the officer orders everyone to be taken to the police station. Before he can act, one of Yuri's friends grabs his arm firmly. The other officers are shocked. The officer angrily asks if he knows what happens to people who lay hands on a police officer. The thug also yells at them to stop resisting because they're already finished. As another of Yuri's friends wonders if this is truly the end, the officer's phone suddenly rings. Odaka answers the call, and an enraged voice on the other end tells him he's gotten himself into serious trouble. Realizing it's his superior, the officer nervously tries to explain that he was only arresting a few criminals. His boss cuts him off and asks if he's talking about Manabu Tojo. The officer stammers and confirms that he is. Looking fearfully at our protagonist, our hero simply smiles, realizing things are about to get interesting. The officer immediately agrees to his superior's orders and promises to release the young man at once. After ending the call, his expression completely changes. The thug, confused, asks why he is arresting them. The officer turns around in fury, tells him to shut up, calls him an idiot, and slaps him hard across the face. He yells that the thug had incredible nerve for laying a hand on Mr. Manabu. The other two officers are completely stunned and even hand their batons to our protagonist as an apology. The officer then approaches our hero, apologizes, and claims it was all a misunderstanding, insisting that the real criminals are the men lying on the ground. Our protagonist stares at him coldly and asks if he has forgotten what he said earlier. With fury in his eyes, he orders the officer to kneel and apologize. Without hesitation, the officer immediately drops to his knees. Begging for mercy, he desperately pleads for his life and asks our protagonist to spare him. Everyone in the warehouse watches in silence as the terrified officer trembles, unable to even lift his head after such humiliation. Our protagonist dismisses him and orders him to collect his trash and disappear, never showing his face again. Relieved, the officer gratefully accepts and thanks him for sparing his life. He and his group quickly leave with their tails between their legs while our hero and his friends watch and go. One of Yudi's friends approaches in amazement, saying he can't believe their friend has someone so powerful back him. From that moment on, he declares our protagonist their leader. The big guy immediately agrees and promises to follow him from now on. Rano smiles and praises him, saying he's as impressive as ever. Our protagonist asks everyone to stop calling him boss. He says that any friend of Yudi is also his friend, but promises that if they truly stand by his side, he'll make it worth their while. The two eagerly accept and shout that with Manabu leading them, they're bound to succeed. After a moment of thought, our hero suggests they start a legitimate business. Everyone looks at him in confusion, wondering where the idea came from. He explains that with Kurok out of the picture, the entire district is now open for the taking. This is their chance to seize all of Kurok's businesses and make a fortune. The gang is shocked by his ambition and asks taking everything isn't going too far. Our protagonist replies that if they're going to do something, they should give it everything they've got or not do it at all. He then turns to Ryamano and asks her to take the evidence they collected and pay a visit to Goda. She immediately understands the plan and smiles confidently. With determination, our hero reveals that he's about to make a deal with the man who truly controls the city. The scene shifts to the boss's mansion, where a servant announces that a gift from Manabu Tojo has arrived. Ryamano enters and finds Mr. Goda sitting in his chair. She greets him respectfully and explains that Tojo asked her to deliver something personally. When Goda opens the envelope, he finds a bank deposit receipt. Ryamano explains that the recipient is Yoshimura Soga, an influential figure in the city, and that the document is proof of bribery that could give Goda a major advantage. Goda silently studies the receipt before looking at the woman standing before him. Ryamano remains calm and confidently waits for his bond. After a brief silence, Goda smiles, clearly pleased with the offer. She then explains that she has one more favor to ask. Curious, Goda tells her to continue. She reveals that their next target is Shurei Yoshimura. Goda dismisses the idea, asking if she's talking about the black market boss who used to be protected by Mandiro, adding that someone like him isn't worth his attention. Ryamano reassures him that they don't need his help dealing with Yoshimura directly. They only need him to cut Yoshimura ties least. They will handle everything else themselves. Finding their request simple, Goda asks what he'll receive in return. She promises that once everything is settled, he'll receive an appropriate reward. Satisfied, Goda smiles, clearly interested in the deal. The story then flashes back to an hour earlier. One of Yudi's friends explains that Shurei Yoshimura rules the city's underground district. Kurok was merely one of his subordinates, and Yoshimura pays Chief Tanaka for police protection. Our protagonist realizes that if they want to reach Yoshimura, they first need to eliminate Tanaka's influence. Yudi's friend nods, understanding the strategy. Our hero concludes that even if Kurok falls, Tanaka wouldn't care unless his connection to Yoshimura is severed. The story returns to the present, where our protagonist and his new gang stand before a mass building. One of Yudi's friends warns that they've just defeated Kurok and are now standing inside Yoshimura's territory. With all of Yoshimura's money, he'll surely have an army of guards, making a direct attack extremely dangerous. Our protagonist calmly tells him to relax because they're here to discuss business, not destroy the place. Encouraged, the young man says he understands and promises to follow his boss till the very end. The group walks toward the mansion with our hero leading the way. Suddenly, two massive Dobermans rush toward them, barking furiously as they surround the group with bared teeth. Unfazed, our protagonist tells his friends not to worry because they're just puppies. The dogs immediately stop barking in shock. An overwhelming aura bursts from our hero, and the image of a white tiger appears behind him, revealing true presence. Terrified, the Dobermans lower their tails and back away. A voice suddenly orders the dogs to return. It is Shurei Yoshimura himself standing at the entrance with his bodyguards. He instantly recognizes our protagonist. Our hero meets his gaze with a calm but determined expression. Yoshimura mocks him, asking if breaking Kurok's legs wasn't enough and whether he's now looking for trouble. Our protagonist coldly replies that what happened with Kurok was personal, but today he's here strictly for business. Yoshimura laughs and asks what kind of business someone like him could possibly have with him before ordering him to leave. His bodyguards immediately move in. One of Yudi's friends quickly restrains a guard from behind with a powerful hold. The other friend grabs the second guard and shouts at him to keep his hands off the boss. The fight begins. Yudi's friend declares that this time he won't hold back. Our protagonist steps forward and lands a devastating punch on one of the guards, sending blood flying everywhere. He then grabs the final guard by the throat with overwhelming strength. Without hesitation, he drives a brutal knee into the man's face, splattering blood in every direction. The defeated guard collapses blood. Furious, one of Yoshimura's men shouts that they asked for this. Yoshimura also loses his temper and warns our protagonist not to get carried away because one phone call is enough to send all of them to prison. Our hero calmly challenges him to make the call, saying they'll wait. Yoshimura is stunned by his confidence and can't believe he's serious. Without wasting time, he calls Chief Tanaka and reports that a group of punks destroying his property demanding immediate assistance. On the other end, Tanaka asks if the person causing the trouble is Manabu Tojo. Our protagonist smiles, confirming it. Tanaka apologizes and says he can't touch Manabu because his hands are tied. Yoshimura panics, demanding to know what he means and asking if he's really abandoning him after everything he's been paid. Ignoring his desperation, Tanaka hangs up. Betrayed, Yoshimura stares at his phone in complete disbelief, unable to process what just happened. With a confident smile, our protagonist asks if they can finally go inside and talk. Having no other choice, Yoshimura agrees and invites them into his mansion. Inside, Yoshimura sits with his bodyguard and a guard dog by his side. Across the table, our hero and his friends are served tea. After taking a sip, Yoshimura asks what Manabu wants to discuss. Getting straight to the point, our protagonist says he heard Kuroki was managing several arcades for him. Annoyed, Yoshimura asks if he knew he was attacking one of his men. Manabu admits he had a personal grudge against Kuroki and says everything that happened was because of that. As compensation, he offers to take over the arcades. Yoshimura's bodyguard immediately loses temper, demanding to know who he thinks he is. The guard draws a knife and threatens our hero, asking if he's looking for a tragic end. With a simple hand gesture, Yoshimura orders him to stop. He then says he's never heard of Manabu and doesn't trust him enough to hand over his businesses. Our protagonist reminds him that Chief Tanaka refused to help the moment he heard his name. Yoshimura realizes he's right and begins wondering who could possibly be backing this young man. He mutters that if Mandiro were still alive, he would never have been forced to list someone like him. Recognizing the name, our protagonist asks if he's referring to Mandiro Yoshida. Surprised, Yoshimura asks how he knows such an influential person. Manabu calmly explains that Mandiro once set him up, but he's no longer alive. Shocked, Yoshimura realizes the story about the fire was a lie, and that this young man is the one truly responsible. As he silently wonders who this mysterious person really is, our hero answers with a faint, unsettling smile. With no better option, Yoshimura agrees to let him manage the businesses and proposes a 70-30 split. Our protagonist asks if he accidentally reversed the numbers. Smiling confidently, he states that he'll take 70% while Yoshimura keeps 30%. The bodyguard angrily raises his knife again and calls him an arrogant rat. Our hero doesn't even react. With a cold stare, he tells the guard to stay out of it. His friends immediately stand up, ready to fight. Before the situation escalates, Yoshimura orders his subordinate to be quiet and announce they'll do as Tojo says. Our protagonist changes the offer on the spot, declaring he'll now take 80%. Both Yoshimura and his bodyguard are left speechless. To everyone's surprise, Yoshimura takes a deep breath and accepts the new terms without arguing. Satisfied, our hero stands up, says he's glad they settled everything so quickly, and hopes they'll have a successful partnership. He extends his hand as if nothing had happened. With no other choice, Yoshimura shakes hand, officially sealing the deal. The scene then shifts outside the mansion. Back at the hideout, Yudi's friends celebrate the victory, proudly talking about how they defeated the guards. Ryamano smiles and says they've finally secured a stable source of income. However, our protagonist says things may not be that simple because Yoshimura's reaction felt suspicious. Lighting a cigarette, he warns everyone not to lower their guard because something isn't right. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Yoshimura's subordinate angrily says he can't stand Tojo anymore and wants to kill him. Yoshimura immediately scolds him, saying only he decides when it's time to act. The subordinate quickly apologizes and promises not to bring it up again. Yoshimura explains that a kid with such powerful back could make anyone disappear. The bodyguard insists he isn't afraid and is willing to die if it means taking our hero down with him. Yoshimura calms him and asks why he thinks he willingly handed over Kuroki's businesses. Confused, the bodyguard asks what he means. With a sinister smile, Yoshimura reveals that there are ways to eliminate someone without getting your own hands dirty. At the hideout, one of Yudi's friends studies a map of the city. He points out that the two arcades are located in Old Town Square, the busiest area in the district. He and Ryamano immediately realize Yoshimura has set a trap. Our protagonist asks why, since a busy location should bring in plenty of money. His friend explains that the square used to belong to a man known as Cobra. Curious, our hero asks who Cobra is because he's never heard of him. Ryamano explains that Cobra became famous for controlling the businesses in that area. She adds that he was imprisoned for 8 years after nearly killing someone and was released earlier this year. Yudi's friend says Cobra is completely insane and will definitely return to reclaim his territory. Our protagonist finally understands the trap hidden behind the agreement. Even so, he declares that it doesn't matter who stands in his way because anyone who challenges him will be crushed. He slams his hand onto the map, showing his determination. One of his friends places a hand on his shoulder and promises to stand beside him no matter what. The other two immediately agree, shouting that they'll follow him until the end. Ryamano quietly watches everyone, still looking slightly worried. Our protagonist reassures her that everything will be fine. With the discussion over, he says they've just acquired 2 businesses and should celebrate. The group heads to a Chinese restaurant to enjoy a feast and celebrate their victory. Everyone raises their glasses and cheers, promising to drink until they drop. During the meal, one of the friends asks where Tojo disappeared to. Yudi says he probably drank too much and went to the restroom. A few moments later, our protagonist returns carrying a large mysterious bag. He places it on the table, leaving everyone confused. After opening the zipper, he pulls out 4 brand new smartphones. One of his friends is stunned and asks if they're really for them. Our hero confirms that each of his new companions opinions is getting one. The young man excitedly shouts that it's the newest model and says the boss is incredibly generous. He immediately starts testing it and happily comments that the games run perfectly. Ryamano picks up hers with a smile and notices it's a different color, clearly chosen especially for her. Yuri, however, says the phones are too expensive and that he can't accept such an expensive gift. Our protagonist replies that they risk their lives for him, so it's the least he can do, adding that trust built through actions like this. His words deeply move everyone, and they look at their new leader with gratitude. Finally, our hero raises his glass and promises that once they take control of the arcades, everyone will share the profit. Everyone raises their glasses once more, toasting to the bright future ahead. Later that night, one of the guys walks down the hallway when a hooded figure suddenly appears in front of him. The mysterious man deliberately bumps into his shoulder before walking away. Annoyed, Manabu's friend yells at the hooded stranger to watch where he's going. Back at the table, he rejoins the celebration and pours everyone another drink. Suddenly, Ryamano's phone rings. Confused, she answers it. On the other end, the big guy laughs. She asks why he's calling when he's sitting right in front of her. He says he just wanted to test his new phone, making everyone burst into laughter. Moments later, the friend who is in the hallway realizes his brand new phone is missed from his pocket. Furious, he shouts that the hooded man from the hallway stole it. Without hesitation, he rushes after the thief. Our protagonist tells everyone to stay and enjoy themselves while he goes after friend. Outside, the young man chases the thief through the streets, yelling for him to stop. Our hero follows close behind, but the friend clumsily trips over his own feet and crashes onto the pavement. Helping him up, our protagonist hears him plead, "Go after the thief." Manabu tells him to head back while he handles the situation himself. He immediately sprints after the fleeing robber. Meanwhile, Ryamano's phone starts vibrating again. Annoyed, she tells Tamura to stop fooling around. The big guy insists it wasn't him this time. Looking at the screen, she notices a missed call from an unknown number. Suspicious, she calls it back. A mysterious voice tells her to meet at their usual place and threatens her if she doesn't come. After the call ends, she quietly sits at the table with a serious expression. Night has fully fallen, and the city lights illuminate the streets as the chase continues. The hooded thief runs into an alley hoping to lose our hero, but Manabu stays right behind him. Eventually, the thief reaches a dead end. He throws the stolen phone onto the ground toward our protagonist. Using the wall for momentum, he leaps upward and grabs the top of the wall. Our hero instantly copies the move, climbing after him with incredible agility. Before the thief can escape, Manabu grabs his leg in midair, yanks him down, and slams him onto the ground. Pinning him down, our protagonist says he finally caught him. The man desperately claims it was all a misunderstanding and insists he isn't a thief. Manabu doesn't believe a word. The man removes his hood and both of them immediately recognize each other. Surprised, Manabu asks what he's doing outside after serving time in the same prison. Relieved, the former inmate thanks God that Manabu is alive. The scene ends with the city skyline behind them as the two unexpectedly reunite. In the alley, they sit together, light cigarette, and talk. The former inmate says the prison became much quieter after Manabu left. He also warns him that Him swore to kill him if they ever met again. Smiling, our hero replies that if Hum wants to come, he's welcome to try. He then says he actually wanted to thank him. Confused, the man asks why everyone believes Manabu is dead. Manabu says he doesn't want to talk about the past, but assures him he's alive and working towards something much bigger. The former inmate explains that he was released a month ago but couldn't find a job. Driven by desperation, he resorted to stealing. With tears in his eyes, he apologizes, saying he had no idea the phone belonged to one of Manabu's friends. Our protagonist stands up and silently looks at the desperate man. After putting out his cigarette, he offers him a job. The former inmate can hardly believe it and asks if he's serious. Crying, he promises he'll do anything. Manabu asks if he's willing to accept him. Our hero jokingly asks if he'd obey even if he told him to take his own life. The man replies that without anyone to rely on, he wouldn't survive another day anyway. Determined, he shouts that Manabu is all he has left and that he'd gladly die for him. Manabu laughs, tells him he was only joking, and helps him to his feet. The two return to the restaurant where everyone is still eating. As soon as Manabu's friend sees the thief, he clenches his fist, stands up, and angrily declares that he's the one who stole his phone. Before he can attack, our protagonist steps in and stops him. He explains that it was all a misunderstanding and introduces the former inmate as his old prison friend Furui. Furui returns the phone and sincerely apologizes, saying he didn't know who it belonged to. The young man accepts the apology and says that anyone who's a friend of Manabu is also a friend of his. Our protagonist promises that Furui will never have to go hungry again, and that he'll protect him. Deeply moved, Furui thanks him and swears to follow him for the rest of his life. Afterward, our hero asks where Ryamano went. Yuri guesses she probably went to the restroom since she isn't at the table. However, another friend explains that Ryamano received a phone call and left looking pale. At that moment, our protagonist's phone starts ringing repeatedly. With a serious expression, he answers, already expecting bad news. He says he has a terrible feeling and that they need to find her immediately. Kitamura becomes furious, wondering who would dare mess Ryamano. Meanwhile, night falls over another part of the city. In a dark, deserted alley with a long staircase in the background, Ryamano walks alone toward an unknown destination. Suddenly, three figures appear at the top of stairs, and one of them calls her over. A man with white hair wearing a pink suit walks down with his henchmen. Angrily, he demands to know where she's been hiding for the past few days. Ryamano remains silent, staring at him with a mix of fear and anger. The man accuses her of running away from her debt and slaps her hard across the face. Despite the the blow, she calmly says she brought the money she owed. She hands him a stack of cash and tells him that after this, they're finished. The loan shark counts the money and complains that it's only 200,000. Ryamano argues that she has already paid him 400,000 for a much smaller loan. Furious, he grabs her by the hair and yanks her close. He shouts that if it weren't for him, her brother would have died long ago. She asks how much he wants to finally end everything. He demands 2 million as a penalty, claiming she betrayed him by seeing another man. Suddenly, someone spits directly into the loan shark's face. Shocked, he freezes. Ryamano yells that he's just one of her many creditors, not her boyfriend. Enraged, he kicks her to the ground and calls her nothing more than a tool. As she falls, he and his men surround her. The loan shark grabs her chin with a look of pure hatred and says he doesn't care how she does it, she will repay every cent. Just as he's about to strike her again, someone firmly grabs his wrist. The man in the pink suit turns around in shock. Emerging from the shadows, our protagonist coldly orders stop. The loan shark demands to know who the intruder is and why he's interfering. Without saying another word, our hero punches him square in the face and asks why he hit the girl. The loan shark angrily claims she's a woman and says he can do whatever he wants with her. Still lying on the ground, Ryamano is stunned by our hero's sudden intervention. She shouts that this piece of trash is not her boyfriend. He's just a coward. The loan shark smirks and sarcastically asks if they are just more of her customers, even offering them a special discount. Unable to tolerate the insult, our protagonist lands another crushing punch, sending blood spraying through the alley. The loan shark is thrown backward, desperately covering his battered face with trembling hand. Our hero glares at him and promises to shut his filthy mouth forever. Bleeding heavily, the loan shark realizes he's in real danger. At that moment, his henchmen rush in, yelling at our hero for daring to touch their boss. 2 more of our protagonist's allies arrive right behind. The fight erupts as they charge forward, kicking the suited thugs one after another. The loan shark wipes the blood from his face and says he recognizes Manabu, but can't remember where from. Our protagonist introduces himself as Manabu Tojo and asks if he really demanded 1 million from his friend. The man admits she owes him a fortune while trying to act tough despite badly. Our protagonist turns to Ryamano one last time and asks whether this man truly means nothing to her. After she confirms it, he cracks his knuckles with a cold smile and says there's no reason to hold back anymore. The loan shark panics, wondering what Manabu is about to do. Without another word, our hero finishes the exchange with a devastating flying kick that sends blood flying across the alley. Another thug rushes in, shouting for his boss. Already prepared, our protagonist instantly counters with a powerful punch that sends the man flying. As the thug lies on the ground, Manabu calmly warns him to stay down unless he wants even more pain. Bruised and furious, the loan shark stands back up and begins insulting Ryamano in an attempt to provoke him. He suddenly pulls out a hidden knife, determined to fight dirty. Holding the blade, he challenges our hero, his eyes burning with rage after being humiliated. Our protagonist simply looks at him with contempt and calls him a coward for needing a weapon fight. The loan shark mocks him, asking if he's finally scared now that things have become serious. Instead of answering, our hero slowly unbuttons his black shirt. The calm gesture makes everyone around him tense. With his chest exposed, he reveals the scars from countless past battles, showing that a knife doesn't intimidate him in the slightest. Panicking, the attacker warns him not to come any closer or he'll kill him right there. Then he lunges forward, screaming for Manabu to die. Our protagonist never takes his eyes off. At the perfect moment, he intercepts the attack by catching the man's arm in midair. He squeezes the attacker's wrist with overwhelming strength, forcing the knife onto the pavement. Without hesitation, he kicks the man's shin, throwing him off balance. He follows with a devastating finishing blow that snaps the attacker's head back and sends blood spraying everywhere. The thug collapses, completely defeated, his face covered in blood and unable to continue fighting. Our protagonist climbs on top of him and unleashes a relentless barrage of punches, venting all his anger. Ryamano desperately begs him to stop, pleading with him not to stain his hands because of her. Lying beneath him, the loan shark desperately begs for his life and admits everything was fault. Our protagonist orders him to pay Ryamano 1 million as compensation and warns him not to even think about run away. Covered in bruises and blood, the man swears he'll pay every cent he now owes her. Our protagonist also orders the loan shark to bring all of his henchmen and kneel to apologize to the girl they humiliated. The loan shark is left speechless by the humiliating demand. Losing his patience, Manabu slams the man's face into the ground without mercy. Broken and terrified, the coward finally agrees to apologize to avoid another beating. Hiroto and his men kneel before Ryamano, apologize, and promise to pay the 1 million they owe her. Ryamano steps forward and orders them to disappear and never show their faces in front of her again. The terrified men remain frozen on the ground until our protagonist coldly asks if they didn't hear what she just said. The gang quickly helps their boss to his feet and runs away with their tails between their legs. Ryamano throws herself into Manabu's arms and thanks him for protecting her. He hugs her back and tells her to stop crying because no one will ever lay a hand on her again. One of Yudi's friends jokingly asks for a hug too, saying he also helped solve the problem. Manabu laughs it off and tells everyone to head back to hideout. On the way, Ryamano quietly asks why he's doing so much for someone like her, insisting she doesn't deserve his protection. With a gentle smile, he tells her she's a friend and her problems are his problem too. She replies that he'll become someone important one day and that having a friend like her will only embarrass him in the future. He tells her to stop worrying and get ready for the arcade transfer the next day. Then he tells everyone it's time to leave, putting an end to the incident. Ryamano smiles smiles brightly, clearly happy to have someone she can rely on. The next day, the scene shifts to their hideout. Everything is ready for the official transfer. Ryamano adjusts our protagonist's tie and sadly asks if she won't be going with them to the arcade. She says she'll stay behind so she won't be a burden and will prepare a nice meal to welcome everyone home. One of Yudi's friends immediately objects, saying today is too important because they're taking over the new business. Our protagonist agrees but tells Ryamano to stay home because if Cobra shows up, things could become dangerous. She smiles and compliments everyone, saying they all look great in their black suit. Meanwhile, Yudi's two friends clearly look uncomfortable. One of them complains, asking if they really have to wear a suit because they're hard to move around in. Our hero explains that they're not going there to fight. It's simply a business inspection, so he tells them not to cause any trouble. The group gets into the car and heads toward their new arcade. When they arrive, one of the friends is amazed by how luxurious the area looks. The big guy explains that this is Cobra's territory and that it's home to the largest arcade in the district. Our protagonist studies the building and declares that they are now its competition. He places a hand on his friend's shoulder and confidently says they can run a much better business. Everyone immediately agrees, ready to conquer their new territory. Just then, two schoolgirls walk by and politely ask past. The group steps aside to let them through. As they leave, one of the girls whispers that one of the men is really handsome. Her friend jokingly asks if she likes older men. Watching them, our protagonist wonders if girls actually go to arcades these days. One of his friends explains that times have changed. Modern arcades now offer games that attract female customers as well, bringing in far more business. Realizing they have to keep up with the times to make money, our hero decides to inspect their own arcade. The scene shifts as the group arrives at the property they recently acquired. The moment they see it, our protagonist is shocked. The building looks completely abandoned with its metal shutter still closed. The entire group stands before the game Plaza Starlight, silently staring at the neglected storefront. Our hero remarks that the difference between this place and the other arcade is enormous. He realizes that's why Yoshimura gave up Kuroki's business so easily. One of the men says he visited about a year ago, and the place used to be packed because it occupied such a great corner. Another explains that the business thrived before Dynasty Arcade was built, and that a nearby school used to bring in plenty of students. Manabu tears down the notice taped to the shutter before opening the end. After looking around, he concludes that if the business failed this badly, someone must have been manipulating things behind the scenes. He grabs the heavy metal shutter and lifts it with all his strength, finally opening the arcade. The group walks inside and finds a dark interior that looks abandoned for a long time. Our protagonist immediately is tasked. He tells Saruateri and Kitamoro to inspect every arcade machine for damage or malfunction. Then he tells another teammate to handle promotional flyers. His friend suggests offering free game tokens during the first 3 days to attract customers. Without wasting any time, one of the gang members switches on the main power, lighting up the arcade. Our protagonist, however, comes up with a better idea. He asks why they don't give real cash to customers instead of ordinary promotion. He hands a stack of bills to one of his friends and tells him he's counting on him to make it happen. Meanwhile, Yudi tests one of the arcade machines and excitedly reports that every machine has worked perfectly. Satisfied, our hero announces that they'll officially open for business the following day. Suddenly, two unfamiliar men enter the arcade with hostile expression. One of them angrily demands to know why they're opening the place without permission. Our protagonist calmly replies that he simply inspects his own business and asks problems. The man in the purple suit shouts that their boss has already sealed the building and that no one is allowed to opt there. Smirking, our hero asks why and demands a proper explanation. The second thug threatens him, saying anyone who interferes with Cobra's business dies. Unfazed, Manabu grabs the man's pointing finger. His friends immediately prepare for a fight while the rest of the group also gets into position. Our protagonist places a hand on his friend's shoulder, telling him to stay calm because he'll handle it himself. He declares that the arcade will open, and if Cobra interferes, he'll deal with the consequences. The man in purple is outraged by his confidence and asks who he thinks he is. Our hero simply stares back in silence. Yudi quietly gets into position, ready for whatever comes next. He and another friend move toward the two troublemakers. Instead of rushing them, they pull down the metal shutter, trapping everyone inside. The two thugs demand to know what they're doing. Our protagonist calmly replies that dogs should be trained inside a cage. Moments later, screams and cries echo from inside the arcade as the pair beg for mercy. When it's over, both men are lying unconscious on the floor. One of the big guys picks them up and orders that they be thrown as far away from the arcade as possible. He carries one of them over his shoulder while another teammate praises his strength. Manabu then assigns new tasks. He orders someone to clean the place, replace the broken glass, and hire 2 cleaners. The long-haired friend happily agrees while holding the money needed for all the expenses. He then asks what the new arcade will be called. Our protagonist pauses for a moment, thinking carefully. Finally, he decides on the name Zenith Musman, saying they should aim for the very top. Everyone immediately likes choice. His friend excitedly promises to have the new sign made as soon as possible. The scene shifts back to the group's hideout, where everyone relaxes after a long day. Back at the apartment, they prepare to eat and finally get some rest. As soon as they walk in, Manabu and Yudi notice that Ryameno is nowhere to be found. Our protagonist spots a note on the table and picks it up. In the letter, she says she thought everything over and can't continue living with them. She thanks everyone for everything they've done for her. Yudi is shocked and asks what the letter means. One friend says living in such a cramped apartment with 5 men must have been difficult for her. Another disagrees, agrees, saying he understands women better and believes Ryamano was clearly upset about something. He asks Manabu what the two of them talked about after everyone else left the previous night. As someone pours him a drink, our protagonist quietly stares into his glass, trying to understand what happened. His mind drifts back to the previous night when he and Ryamano walked alone through the alley. She had looked determined, clasping her hands together as if she had made an important decision. In the memory, she suddenly hugged him tightly from behind. With tears in her eyes, she confessed that her biggest regret was never valuing herself before meeting him. He gently held her hands and told her to start valuing herself from now on. She admitted that she'd been watching him since college and thought he was innocent and adorable back then. Smiling faintly, Manabu rubbed the back of his neck and said the person he is now is his true self. She then asked why he was still so kind to her after everything she had done to him. He answered exactly as before. She's his friend, and he'd risk his life for a friend without hesitation. As he reached over to wipe away her tears, she quietly asked if they were really just friends. Manabu nodded and said that no matter what happened, she would always be his most important friend. Hearing those words, disappointment filled her face. She quietly said she finally understood. Back in the present, our protagonist wonders if he said something wrong. One of his friends bluntly asks if he really didn't realize that Ryamano is deeply in love with him. Manabu admits he already knows, but their lives are too dangerous and they're barely surviving as it is. He says someone like him could never make a woman happy and refuses to carry that ability. His friend presses further, asking if that means he doesn't dislike her either. Manabu replies that he doesn't have time to think about love anymore. He even believes he'll never have the right to love anyone again. His friend points out that from Ryamano's perspective, she was rejected and left believing she wasn't good enough. Our protagonist falls silent, staring thoughtfully at the table. Later that night, he lies awake in bed. Unable to sleep, he stares at the ceiling deep in thought. He remembers Ryamano sleeping beside him that night, and regret begins to weigh heavily in his heart. The next morning, he wakes up with a new idea for the arcade. One of his friends arrives and reports that he has already completed everything Manabu assigned him. He proudly shows the promotional flyer he designed, which looks polished and eye-catching. Our protagonist compliments the work before saying he has one more important task for the team. With a confident smile, his friend assures him he'll take care of it without any problem. Another member of the gang reports that his assignment is finished as well and says the renovation will be completed by that night. Manabu tells Yudi and another teammate to head out together that afternoon, but reminds them to be careful. The long-haired friend assures him that if they run into Cobra's men again, they'll retreat immediately. He explains that it's still Cobra's territory, so they don't stand a chance right now, but once their boss is ready, they'll crush them. Yudi then asks what Manabu plans to do. Our hero tells him to visit Ryamano's house that afternoon because they need her help managing the cash register and handling change. Yudi agrees to bring her. With a confident smile, Manabu reveals that he's going to meet Cobra himself. Concerned, Yuta asks if he's really planning to fight them already. Manabu shakes his head and says not yet. He explains that gathering information is the key to victory, so he's going to scout the rival arcade first. One of his friends warns him that the men they beat up yesterday already saw his face, making the trip extremely dangerous. Our protagonist calmly says not to worry because changing his appearance will be enough to avoid recognition. Just then, Furui quickly stands up and volunteers for the mission. He tells Manabu there's no need for him to go because undercover work is specialty. Our protagonist refuses and orders him to simply follow instructions, saying he'll personally handle the dangerous job. The scene shifts to the rival arcade, Dynasty Amusements, a large and crowded establishment. The next day, our hero enters disguised with a cap and face mask. His disguise allows him to move through the arcade unnoticed while observing everything around him. Inside, the place packed with customers enjoying the game. He even notices several girls playing a dance game, highlighting the arcade's popularity. To blend in even more, he inserts a token into one of the machines and casually starts playing like any ordinary customer. At that moment, the two men beaten the previous day walk right past him without recognizing him. Still recovering from their injuries, they have no idea their enemy is only a few steps away. The pair head through a back door. Sensing something suspicious, our protagonist quietly follows them. He approaches the room and knocks on the door, calling for someone named Ryoto. Inside, he finds a man entertaining himself with a woman while several henchmen stand nearby. One of the injured subordinates interrupts and desperately reports that they were defeated. Annoyed, Ryoto stands up and demands to know who attacked them and how many people there were. The thug explains that he isn't sure, but saw about 4 men reopening the arcade on the corner and went to investigate. Without listening to any excuses, Ryoto punches his own subordinate square in the face. The man collapses unconscious while his partner watches shocked. Furious, Ryoto calls them useless idiots for getting beaten without even identifying their attackers. Terrified, the other thug apologizes and reveals that the rival arcade is holding its grand reopening tomorrow. With a sinister grin, Ryoto says it's amusing that a group of newcomers dare to disrespect Cobra. To vent his anger, he delivers a devastating kick to a nearby punching bag. He declares that they'll storm the arcade the next day and remind everyone who truly controls the territory. Despite the beating they just received, his men immediately accept the order and begin preparing for the attack. Smiling coldly, Ryoto tells them to arm themselves for the quotation the following morning. Still hidden in disguise, our protagonist overhears everything as the gang vows revenge. He watches them leave, boasting that no one will stand a chance once their boss joins the fight. Without wasting a second, Manabu sends a message to his team, warning them about the attack planned for the next day. night falls, and Dynasty Arcade remains crowded and busy. The following morning, Ryoto gathers his men outside the building. One of them suggests bringing even more. Inside the arcade, several customers discuss how someone dared challenge Ryoto and say opening an arcade on his corner is practically suicide. Joining the conversation, our disguised protagonist casually asks one of them who Ryoto is. The player finds the question strange and explains that the entire area belongs to Cobra, asking if he's new around there. He then reveals that Cobra was recently released from prison and rarely appears in person, making Ryoto his right-hand man. Hearing this, our protagonist realizes Ryoto is the key to bringing down the real boss. Suddenly, one of the gang members starts shouting inside the arcade, calling every thug together for the upcoming fight. The others eagerly respond, raising their fists and preparing for battle. Within moments, a large crowd of gang members gathers at the entrance, ready to cause chaos. Outside, the blonde thug who was beaten earlier stares directly at our disguised protagonist. He points at him, slowly beginning to recognize the face hidden beneath the disguise. With a look of pure hatred, the bully recognizes him and is furious to realize he had been disguised. The protagonist remains completely unfazed, staring back with a cold, calculated expression. The blonde guy grabs a baseball bat and prepares to fight, but the protagonist casually snatches it away and tells him he should have brought his own weapon. At that moment, Cobra's entire gang marches toward the squad's newly opened arcade. When they arrive, they find the protagonist team waiting, all dressed in suits. One of Manabu's friends holds a huge stack of cash, confusing everyone. Furui is shocked by the amount and says it's enough to buy a motorcycle. Yuri immediately tells him to stop planning because everything's the boss order. Using a megaphone, Yuri announces the grand opening of Zenit Musman Arcade to everyone nearby. He then declares that, to celebrate the occasion, they will throw money into the crowd. The pedestrians erupt with excitement and celebrate their unexpected luck. Watching the scene, Cobra becomes furious, unable to understand the enemy's strategy. Even so, he refuses to back down and continues leading his gang toward the arcade. On one side, Cobra's gang charges forward. On the other, the protagonist and his friends wait confidently with smile. The team holds their ground while Yuri keeps the megaphone and Furui prepares the cash. Enraged, Cobra orders his men to drag the leader over because he wants to crush him personally. One of his followers shouts for everyone to attack, officially starting the fight. The civilians go wild as money fills the air, celebrating their good fortune. Cobra realizes his enemies are serious and sends his strongest fighter forward. He concludes that the leader is no ordinary opponent and decides he must catch him off guard. Yuri sees the enemy approaching and warns everyone to get ready. Cobra's gang yells for the civilians to move aside. One thug rushes in with a baseball bat, ready to strike anyone in his way. Meanwhile, Furui keeps smiling while holding the money. Suddenly, he throws the entire bundle into the air, creating a massive rain of cash across the street. People immediately swarm the money, blocking the gang's advance. Furious, Cobra watches his plan fall apart as even one of his own men gets distracted trying to grab a bill. Without hesitation, Cobra punches his subordinate and demands to know what he thinks he's doing. He orders everyone to stop fooling around and destroy the rival arcade. A few gang members finally push through the crowd and charge forward. Grinning, Furui tells them not to rush because he has one more surprise. He reveals a massive chain of fireworks hidden in his hand. Without wasting a second, he lights them and throws them directly into the advancing gang. The fireworks explode violently, creating deafening blasts that throw the thugs into panic. Completely enraged, Cobra grips his baseball bat and shouts that no one will leave alive. Seeing the perfect opportunity, the protagonist team launches a full attack against the disoriented enemies. One of Manabu's friends grabs an opponent from behind while the man desperately begs to be released. Another teammate dodges a bat swing and lands a clean counterattack. From above, the battle shows the protagonist group overwhelming Cobra's gang. Furui appears to be enjoying himself, shouting that the enemies are too weak. With incredible speed, he lands a devastating punch that sends blood flying everywhere. Cobra approaches and mocks Furui for enjoying himself while beating his men. Unintimidated, Furui charges straight at him, yelling for the tattooed boss stop act so tough. He lands a powerful punch to Cobra's face, catching him off guard. However, Cobra retaliates with even greater force, knocking Furui to the ground. Furui immediately realizes he cannot defeat him alone. As Furui lies on the ground, Cobra raises his baseball bat to finish him off. Suddenly, something strikes him, and his expression instantly changes to shock and rage. After falling, Cobra pulls out a knife and demands to know who attacked him. Standing behind him, the protagonist appears holding a knife and calmly says he heard Cobra was looking for him. Slowly, the protagonist removes his mask, finally revealing his true identity to everyone. He introduces himself as Manabu Tojo and warns that anyone who stands against him will meet a terrible fate. With a smirk, he mocks Cobra's nickname and says it would be a bad idea if hell again. Just then, police sirens echo through the streets, interrupting the fight. Cobra's gang immediately panics, wondering who called the police. One of the thugs asks Cobra what they should do now that he has been wounded. Supported by his men, Cobra gets back on his feet and says he will retreat for now, but promises revenge. The protagonist tells him this was only a warning and that next time, no one will survive. Seeing his injured friend, Manabu orders his men to take him to the hospital immediately and find the best doctor available. Holding his companion's face, he assures him that he will survive and that he will save him. Yudi and another teammate carry the unconscious man away in search of medical help. One of the gang members asks Manabu why he didn't simply stab Cobra in a vital spot, kill him. Manabu explains that he understands human anatomy anatomy and deliberately avoided the vital organs, though he admits it would not have mattered if Cobra had died. Still worried, Yuri reminds him that he could end up back in prison because of what happened. With complete confidence, Manabu replies that the investigation unit will never come after them again. The scene then shifts to a modern hospital, revealing that Cobra has been taken there. Inside, Cobra groans in pain while doctors treat his severe injuries. Meanwhile, two of his subordinates kneel before a mysterious man smoking a cigarette. From the shadows, the true mastermind calmly asks who was responsible for causing all the chaos. Lying in a hospital bed, the tattooed man admits he has never heard of them before and reveals that the leader's name is Manabu Tojo. The real boss, known as Cobra, sits down with a serious expression. Repeating the protagonist's name, a small snake appears on his shoulder, revealing his true power. The story then shifts to a prison flashback where Cobra is talking with two inmates. He tells one of them that he will be released the next day and promises to help him however he can. The large inmate says there is someone he wants Cobra to find after leaving prison. Smiling sinisterly, Cobra asks for the man's name. The bearded prisoner shouts, "Manabu Tojo!" and swears to make him pay for framing him in the past. Cobra calmly promises that he will drag Manabu into hell no matter where he is. Back in the present, Ryoto continues complaining about his injuries in the hospital while Cobra silently watches. Seeing his subordinate's condition, Cobra decides to handle the situation himself. Soon after, a police car arrives at the protagonist's arcade to investigate the disturbance. One of Manabu's men explains that a group of unknown attackers invaded the arcade. He and another teammate desperately ask the officers to arrest those responsible. A police officer approaches Manabu and asks if he is the manager. When questioned about the attackers, Manabu explains that they belong to the rival arcade gang led by Ryoto. Angered by the report, the officer says the gang has no respect for the law and promises to investigate the case and make them pay. Manabu then requests police protection, claiming he fears the gang will return for revenge. Smiling, the officer assures him that the police will remain nearby and prevent any further attack. Despite the reassurance, Manabu keeps a serious expression, suggesting everything is going according to plan. Later, one of his friends reports that they have finally located the man Manabu asks them track down. Manabu orders them to meet him at a nearby cafe because the situation is about to become serious. The scene shifts to a cozy cafe where a gray-haired man wearing glasses is being served while one of Manabu's men sits with him. Looking through the window, the man watches the protagonist's friends speaking with the police outside. He adjusts his glasses and announces that he will officially begin document everything. One of Manabu's men warns him that doing so could make Cobra's gang against him. The man reveals that Cobra's gang killed his brother 8 years earlier. Yuri replies that they share the same goal since they both want to eliminate Cobra once for all. The man with glasses corrects him, explaining that Cobra is not his own target. He says Cobra can only operate because powerful people continue protecting him. Surprised, Yuri asks whether he is afraid of confronting such influential figures. Without hesitation, the man silently stares back with determination before saying that he will stand by his principles even if it costs life. He then shows his work identification. Outside, the protagonist quietly watches the conversation inside the cafe. At that moment, Cobra and his gang march down the street, ready for another confrontation. They stop in front of a police car parked outside the arcade. One of Manabu's friends nervously asks whether the police will really protect them. Another teammate angrily cracks knuckles, swearing to avenge their injured friend. However, Manabu stops him and orders everyone not to fight back time. His friend is stunned and asks if they are supposed to stand there and let themselves get beaten. With a serious look, Manabu simply tells him to obey his order. Cobra's gang approaches the officers blocking the arcade entrance. One of the policemen greets Cobra and asks why he is there. Cobra recognizes Officer Remoto and smiles with contempt. He explains that one of his men was seriously injured and that he has come to settle the score. The officer angrily accuses Cobra's gang of being criminals for using weapons. Suddenly, his tone changes. Claiming he has urgent business at the police station, he leaves Cobra free to do as he pleases. One of Manabu's friends is shocked and asks why the police are abandoning them. The corrupt officer coldly tells him to be grateful he is not the one being arrested. The police car drives away, leaving the protagonist's group alone against Cobra's gang. Cobra steps forward and asks if he is really Manabu Tojo. Instead of answering directly, Manabu asks whether Cobra knows who he is. Ignoring the question, Cobra calmly lights a cigarette. He says he has never heard of Manabu before, but promises to send him to hell because he always keeps his word. With a confident smile, Manabu accepts the challenge. Cobra immediately orders his men to destroy everything in sight. One of Manabu's friends angrily tries. Once again, Manabu stops him and orders everyone to let the gang do whatever they want. With no resistance, Cobra's men smash the arcade windows with baseball bats before storming inside and destroying every game machine. Furious, one of Manabu's friends clenches his fists and asks why they are not allowed to fight back. Manabu taunts Cobra by reminding him that he was the one who injured his friend. Remembering their previous encounter, Cobra vows that Manabu will pay for everything. He suddenly charges forward and lands a powerful punch that sends Manabu staggering. Not satisfied, Cobra follows with a devastating kick that knocks him to the ground. Watching their leader being beaten, one of his friends panics and asks what he's doing. Manabu immediately orders him to stay back and reminds him to let Cobra do whatever he wants. Although confused, his friend realizes everything is part of a larger plan. Meanwhile, inside the cafe, one of Cobra's men attacks the man with glasses using a baseball bat. Without mercy, he repeatedly beats him as he lies helpless lower. Watching from a distance, Yuri clenches clenches his fists in anger. Another teammate explains that Cobra behaves this way because powerful people continue protecting. Yuri asks whether they should simply abandon the arcade and stay out of Cobra's way. His friend refuses, saying they must first find a way to strip Cobra of his powerful ally. At that moment, the man with glasses appears holding a camera and tells them to create an even bigger incident. A barbed wire baseball bat lands on the ground right in front of the protagonist. He lies in a pool of his own blood, badly injured. Yuri panics at the sight, calling out his name and trying to wake him up. Cobra boasts that he rules the city and threatens the group once again. One of the protagonist's friends angrily shouts that heaven will punish Cobra for all his evil deeds. Cobra laughs, claiming the police and prosecutors are all on his side. Barely conscious, the protagonist can only spit blood onto the ground. Satisfied with the destruction, Cobra orders his men to leave. Still lying on the ground, the protagonist glares at Cobra with pure hatred and contempt as the gang walks away, leaving nothing but destruction behind. Yuri asks the man with glasses if he managed to record the entire assault. Smiling confidently, the man confirms that he captured everything and says Cobra will finally get what he deserved. Determined, Yuri moves on to the next phase of the plan. He rushes to the injured protagonist, helps him onto his back, and together with the others carries him to the hospital. The scene shifts to the exterior of a large hospital where the protagonist is taken. Inside, a nurse tells Furui to stay still so his injuries do not get worse. With a smile and wearing a neck brace, Furui jokes that despite appearances, he knows how to listen. The nurse remains serious and leaves the room without reacting. As soon as she is gone, Furui sits up, determined. He says he cannot stay in bed while Manabu and the others still need him. Suddenly, he looks toward the door and his expression turns shocked. His teammates enter, pushing Manabu on a hospital bed. The protagonist is covered in bandages and appears unconscious. The friend in pajamas rushes over and anxiously asks what happened to their boss. Yuri reassures him that the doctor said the injuries are not life-threatening and that Manabu will recover. Angrily, the injured friend asks if Cobra did this, and Yuri immediately confirms it. Enraged, he clenches his fist and vows to kill Cobra in revenge. The group's strongest member stops him by grabbing him before he can leave. The young man protests, asking why he is being held back. Yuri tells him to calm down and reveals that everything happened according to Manabu's plan. Everyone in the room is stunned by the revelation. Yuri explains that their leader deliberately acted as bait to bring Cobra down, and now all they have to do is wait. Moments later, the door opens and a young woman rushes into the room, calling Manabu's name. She runs to his bedside, worried about his condition. The protagonist opens his eyes and softly says her name while Yuri watches. Without warning, the girl turns around and slaps Yuri across the face. Everyone in the room is left speechless. Furious, she demands to know how they could let something like this happen to Manabu. Yuri tries to explain that everything was part of the plan. She breaks down in tears, saying it was unbearable watching get beaten right in front of her. The protagonist gently tells her not to worry because he will be fine. She apologizes for not being there to protect him. Smiling, Manabu tells her not to blame herself because this is only the beginning of Cobra's downfall. He then asks his friends what happened to their arcade. They explain that the place was completely destroyed, causing millions in damages. Instead of getting upset, Manabu smiles and says that is exactly what they needed. Everyone looks at him in confusion, wondering if he has lost mind. Yuri explains that, following Manabu's orders, every act of violence was recorded on video. The group is shocked before finally realizing the plan. Manabu explains that they will expose Cobra's crimes along with his connections to the corrupt police. The friend in pajamas praises the strategy. Satisfied, Manabu says all they have to do now is wait for the news spread. Soon afterward, television reports reveal that a criminal gang attacked and destroyed a rival arcade. The broadcast shows footage of the assault and exposes the police for doing nothing to stop it. In his office, a man wearing glasses reads the newspaper with a grim expression. He is furious that Cobra caused trouble immediately after being released from prison and that the media uncovered the incident. Angrily, he picks up the phone to make an important call. On the other end, someone calmly counts stacks of cash. The caller is connected to the corrupt police chief, who answers without concern. The politician angrily says Cobra is damaging their reputation and declares that he will no longer protect. The police chief laughs and says they can simply blame the local office. He even suggests staging Cobra's arrest to calm public opinion. The politician falls silent to consider posing. After lighting a cigarette, he says the idea is good, but the bigger problem is the reporter who published the story. The corrupt police chief understands immediately and promises with a smile to handle the reporter himself. The scene then shifts to the arcade, now operating under the new name Dynasty Amusement. Outside, a large crowd protests against violence and corruption, demanding a safer city. From his office, Cobra watches the angry protesters gathering outside. Annoyed, he wonders if this is another one of Manabu's scheme. One of his subordinates offers to beat the protesters into submission. Cobra calls him an idiot, warning that if reporters capture another incident, they will be finished. The subordinate asks what they should do instead and swears to kill Manabu with his own hand. Smirking, Cobra tells him not to worry because they still have power backing them. At that moment, 2 police cars arrive with their sirens blaring. Several officers step out and march toward Cobra's office. Watching from a distance, the protagonist's friends wonder if the police are finally going to arrest Cobra. The officers order the crowd to move back, announcing that they are there to take the criminal custody. As the police enter the building, one of the protagonist's friends smiles greatly. An officer quietly tells Cobra that the arrest is only for show to calm the public and asks him to cooperate. Cobra agrees and orders one of his men to prepare a special gift for the chief. Escorted by the officers, Cobra Cobra calmly walks out of the building. Yudi and another teammate watch everything unfold, confused by what they are seeing. As Cobra walks past them, he gives them a mocking smile, acting as if he is still in complete control. Yudi immediately realizes the arrest is nothing more than a staged performance. At the police station, the corrupt police chief waits for Cobra's arrival. One of Cobra's subordinates delivers a special gift on behalf of Boss. Curious, the chief opens the package and finds stacks of cash as a token of appreciation. With a fake smile, he says the gift was unnecessary and calls Cobra too generous. Lighting a cigarette, Cobra calls him a hypocrite and asks what he really wants. The police chief explains that the politician is furious and warns that if his promotion is affected, they will both be in trouble. Cobra dismisses the concern and warns that he will not stay silent if they threaten him. The corrupt officer replies that what seemed like a small incident has become a major problem because it reached the public. Cobra reveals that they have already identified the source of the leak. He shows the reporter's file and says the only solution is to silence him permanently. With a sinister smile, Cobra says his snake is hungry for human flesh. Back at the hospital, two of the protagonist's friends rush into the room and report that Himoto has taken Cobra away. The friend in pajamas celebrates, believing the enemy is finally gone. However, the protagonist immediately panics and shouts that this is terrible because the reporter is now in danger. The scene shifts to a white van parked outside a house at night. Cobra's men step out carrying baseball bats, ready for the mission. Their leader explains that the police chief provided the address and orders them to send the reporter to hell. He assigns two men to stay outside in case the target tries to escape. The rest of the gang heads upstairs toward the reporter's apartment. Reaching the door, the leader confirms they have found the right place. Without hesitation, they begin smashing the door. Inside, the man with glasses is startled by the loud banging. With one powerful kick, the gang breaks the lock and storms into the apartment. Armed with bats, they rush inside, ready to attack. Instead, they are stunned by what they find. The protagonist's entire team is calmly waiting for them on the living room sofa. One of Manabu's friends says he has been looking forward to settling the score. The tattooed leader laughs and asks if they really believe a bunch of weaklings can protect the reporter. The group's powerhouse steps forward and asks if he was the one who injured his teammate. Before he can act, the friend in pajamas stops him, insisting that he will handle the fight himself. Annoyed, the gang leader orders his men to wipe everyone out. The thugs charge toward the group. One of the protagonist's friends grabs two buckets filled with a mysterious liquid and throws the contents over the attackers, soaking them completely. Confused, the gang members ask what it is. The friend in pajamas immediately tells one of his teammates to turn off the light. The room goes completely dark and the enemy's bodies begin glowing. Yudi warns everyone to be careful because the liquid is glow in the dark paint. Hidden in the darkness, one thug is struck square in the face with a bat and collapses instantly. The others panic. Unable to understand what happened, the protagonist's team takes advantage of the glowing targets and begins surrounding them. Using the darkness to their advantage, they overwhelm the gang one by one. The gang leader watches in shock as his men are defeated so easily. The friend in pajamas quietly sneaks behind him, preparing to strike. The tattooed leader notices at the last second and quickly turns to swing his wooden bat. The group's powerhouse blocks the attack with his arm without flinching. Looking straight at his opponent, he asks if he can somehow see in the dark as well. The gang leader glares at him in surprise. Without hesitation, he delivers a powerful kick to the big man's chest. The powerhouse falls back, wondering how his opponent's eyes adjusted so quickly. The villain boasts that they really thought such a simple trick could defeat him. Despite his injuries, the big man gets back on his feet. He answers with a devastating punch that makes the gang leader spit blood. Preparing to finish the fight, he throws another heavy punch. However, the tattooed man dodges with incredible speed. He immediately counters with a crushing kick to the powerhouse head. The impact leaves him dazed as he wipes the blood's face. Mocking him, the gang leader says brute strength alone will never beat him. Meanwhile, the rest of the protagonist team continues dominating the fight in the darkness. The villain arrogantly declares that fighting a truly strong man like him is pointless. Suddenly, a bright light shines directly into his face. The tattooed man covers his eyes, complaining about the glare. The friend in pajamas has turned on a phone flashlight and tells him to stop acting so arrogant. Taking advantage of the distraction, he lands a full force punch square across the villain's face. Back at the hospital, the protagonist reassures Omri that his friends will be fine. She asks him to promise that once everything is over, he will stop fighting and live a life. He agrees, saying he will leave that life behind after taking over Cobra's dynasty. Surprised, she asks if that has been his goal from the very beginning. Manabu replies that it no longer matters and tells her to go home and get some rest. Worried, she agrees and says goodbye. As she reaches the door, she pauses and looks back at him. With a faint smile, she playfully calls out to get attention. Turning toward him, she asks what he wants. Still lying in bed, Manabu simply tells her to be careful on her way home. She quietly agrees, though her disappointed expression says otherwise. Outside the hospital, she walks toward a black car parked nearby. Inside the car, a mysterious man asks if she is Monterey. She stares at him and asks who he is and what he wants. The man introduces himself and says Cobra sent him to pick her up. The scene shifts to the hospital at night. Back in his room, the protagonist lets out a worried sigh. Suddenly, he hears shouting outside, along with people telling others to get out. Suspicious, he sits up in bed. Without hesitation, he grabs a glass bottle to use as a weapon. Moments later, Cobra's men burst into the room. The bald leader asks if he is Manabu as the protagonist prepares to fight. The thug charges, but the hero dodges and smashes the bottle across face. Furious, the bald man orders everyone to kill him. Outnumbered, the protagonist punches through the window. To everyone's shock, he jumps out of the 4th floor window to escape. The bald thug can't believe it and yells that he's sane. The gang rushes to the window and watches him fall toward the ground. After landing safely, the protagonist flashes middle finger at them. Enraged, the bald man orders his men to chase him. The gang rushes out, knocking a nurse over in the hallway. Outside, the protagonist sprints through the streets, tearing off his bandages as he runs. He heads toward the car where the girl is waiting. Seeing him, she calls out his name. She reaches into the glove compartment, but the mysterious man suddenly grabs her wrist. He tells her the hero is finished and that she is coming with them to meet Cobra. Terrified, she bursts into tears. Meanwhile, the protagonist keeps running and shouts for his pursuers to keep up. Even barefoot, he races across the cold pavement. He leads them into an empty parking lot, clearly with a plan in mind. The gang finally catches up and says Cobra wants head. The protagonist calmly replies that he never intended to escape. He only lured them somewhere with no witnesses. The thugs are confused by his confidence. Surrounded by a dark aura, he pulls out an improvised weapon and challenges them to fight. Meanwhile, the black car arrives at an abandoned warehouse far from the city. The man drags the girl to a deep pit filled with venomous snake. He reports to Cobra that the hero should already be dead and that the girl has been delivered. Sitting with his back turned, Cobra simply replies, "Good work." Frightened, the girl asks what he wants from her. Cobra turns around and says that anyone who opposes him never dies peacefully. One of his men approaches carrying a glass box filled with rats. Smiling wickedly, Cobra dumps the rats into the snake pit. The snakes immediately attack, violently devouring them. Cobra says he has heard rumors about Tojo and admits he's intelligent. He wonders how a prison escapee dared challenge him for territory. The girl firmly replies that she has nothing to say and that she is going back to Manebu. Angered, one of Cobra's men slaps her across the face and threatens her with snake. She refuses to back down, shouting that Manabu would never lose to trash like them. The white-haired thug raises his hand to hit her again, but Cobra stops him. He tells his subordinate not to force a lady who refuses to cooperate. He adds that the snakes are still hungry after such a small meal. The gang throws the girl into a large cage. They lock it with a heavy padlock to prevent her escape. From inside the cage, desperately asks what they are doing. The cage slowly begins rising to the air. Looking down, she sees the pit of venomous snakes directly beneath her. Frozen with fear, she can only stare in terror. Cobra tells her that every hour the cage will be lowered a little more until she tells him everything. The scene returns to the hospital where everything started going wrong. The protagonist's friends rush back to his room, calling his name. Instead, they find the room empty with the window shattered. One of them immediately realizes it was a trap and that their leader is in danger. A captured thug laughs and mocks them, saying Manabu is already dead by now. Furious, the group's powerhouse knocks him down with a heavy punch. Yudi says Manabu escaped through the window and orders everyone to find him. The entire team races through the hospital corridors. Outside, they run through the streets, desperately shouting Manabu's name. Suddenly, they hear a strange noise and become alert. Turning the corner, they find the protagonist standing over the defeated bodies of Cobra's men. Although covered in injuries, he remains standing with an improvised weapon in his hand. One of his friends is stunned, saying their leader is as strong as a monster. The team gathers around him. Manabu immediately asks about the reporter they were protecting. One of his friends says the reporter is safe at another friend's house. Manabu warns that nowhere is safe because the corrupt police are also hunting him. The captured thug laughs, saying hiding is pointless because the reporter is destined to die. The protagonist demands to know who the powerful figure behind the entire op is. The thug refuses to betray his boss and swears he will never reveal truth. Angered, Manabu grabs him by the throat. The powerhouse punches the prisoner and orders him to talk if he wants to avoid another beating. The thug only laughs and tells them to kill him if they dare. Manabu stops his friend before he can continue. He tells everyone to leave for now and says they will decide later what to do with prisoner. The scene shifts to the wall of a traditional Japanese house at night. Inside, one of Manabu's friends throws the captured thug into a room and orders him to stay quiet. He locks the door with a padlock to keep escaping. Outside, the rest of the group gathers as one of them calls for their leader. The men assigned to protect the reporter explain that the police showed up, forcing them to hide. Angrily, Yudi says this proves the corrupt officers work together. Feeling guilty, the reporter says he is ready to surrender so he will not cause any more trouble. Manabu reassures him, promising that as long as he is alive, no one will lay a hand on. The scene ends with an open first aid kit resting on the living table. One of the protagonist's friends changes his bandages and tells him to stop pushing himself so hard. He asks what they should do now that neither the police nor Cobra is willing to back down. The protagonist suggests moving the reporter to Mr. Goda's house where he will be much safer. Just then, his phone rings from an unknown number. He answers and asks who is calling. With a sinister smile, Cobra replies that he has Manare with him. The protagonist immediately becomes furious and demands to know what Cobra has done to her. Cobra mocks him, saying he has not done anything yet, but cannot promise what will happen next. As he speaks, he watches the snake pit from his chair. To prove his point, the girl's cage begins lowering, and she screams terror. The venomous snakes become restless as the cage descends closer to them. Cobra warns that in about an hour, she will be playing with his pet snake. The protagonist responds that Cobra's subordinate is also being held hostage and threatens to send them all to hell. Realizing both sides have hostages, Cobra proposes an exchange. The protagonist immediately agrees, saying that is exactly what he wanted to hear. After hanging up, one of his friends asks in shock if Manare has really been captured. He confirms it and says they will use the captured thug as leverage to rescue her. One of the group warns that entering enemy territory will be extremely dangerous. The protagonist agrees, saying the coming battle will be a fight to the death. Yuri eagerly declares that they will charge straight at Cobra and save the girl. The group's powerhouse says he owes Manabu his life and will follow him to the ends of the earth. Manabu thanks him but says he has a different. He orders the big man to escort the reporter to a secure location and asks Mr. Goda for help. The powerhouse looks worried but accepts the assignment. Manabu reminds him that as long as the reporter is alive, they still have leverage. The big man walks into the room where the captured gang member is held. He grabs the prisoner by the collar and lifts him off the floor. Yuri tells the captive they are going to meet Cobra and orders him to lead the way. The thug laughs, saying they are all walking towards certain death. Angered, Yuri slaps him across the face and tells him to shut up. The scene shifts to the abandoned warehouse where Cobra's men are waiting for the hostage exchange. The protagonist group arrives with the prisoner and faces the enemy gang. The gang leader watches them silently with a serious expression. Growing impatient, Yuri tells the thugs to get out of the way. One of Cobra's men orders them to hurry up and release their captive. The rest of the gang prepares for a fight. However, the prisoner tells them Cobra will handle everything himself and orders them not to interfere. The protagonist team enters the warehouse surrounded by enemy thugs. Yuri notices they are blocking every exit and sarcastically compliments their preparation. Inside the hanging cage, the girl cries out, calling for her beloved to save her. The group continues walking toward Cobra. Yuri stares at the villain with unwavering determination. Sitting comfortably in his chair, Cobra welcomes them to his nest of venomous snake. The scene briefly shifts to a luxurious mansion on a bright day. Inside, the powerhouse and the reporter are sitting on a white sofa. A woman wearing a black dress approaches with a tray of tea. She serves them and tells them that any friend of Tojo is welcome to ask for whatever they need. The powerhouse asks if Mr. Goda can hide the reporter for a while. Showing the reporter's photo, he explains that guards have already been assigned to protect him. Mr. Goda arrives and says that with this evidence, they now have a bargaining chip against the politician. The woman mentions that Tojo is about to fight Cobra and that one of them may not survive. Mr. Goda immediately orders his men to send Multo to stop the fight and keep both men alive. Back at the warehouse, Yuri demands that Cobra release the girl. Cobra mocks him, saying he is in no position to make demand. He orders his men to lower the cage even closer to the snake. The cage sways as it descends and the girl screams in fear. The snakes become increasingly agitated beneath her. With tears in her eyes, she begs Manebu to save her. Yuri points an improvised weapon at the hostage and threatens to kill him unless the girl is released. One of Cobra's men laughs at the prisoner for getting captured again. Grinding his teeth in anger, the hostage remains silent. Yuri follows through on his threat and kills the captive in front of everyone. The thug collapses to the ground, leaving his comrade stunned. The white-haired subordinate says the dead man can repay his debt in his next life. He grabs the corpse by the legs and drags it toward the snake pit. Without hesitation, he throws the body into the pit. The snakes immediately swarm the corpse and begin tearing it apart. Yuri asks if this is how Cobra treats his own men. Cobra replies that the world belongs to the strong and that it is simply kill or be killed. He offers to let them leave alive if they hand over the reporter. The protagonist refuses, saying he knows it is a trap. Yuri draws his improvised weapon and charges straight at Cobra. The white-haired subordinate steps in front of his boss and praises Yuri's courage. Cobra declares that if Yuri defeats his subordinate, the girl will be released. Yuri replies that the man is not worthy of fighting Manabu and that he will handle himself. The white-haired thug says he hates taking orders from anyone. He signals his men while glancing toward the girl trapped in the cage. The protagonist accepts the challenge without hesitation. The white-haired thug removes his jacket and prepares to fight. He slips on a pair of brass knuckles to gain an advantage. One of the protagonist's long-haired friends complains that the fight is unfair because of the weapon. The thug tells him to be grateful he is not killing them all immediately. Shouting that they will pay for defeating his comrades, he launches his attack. He opens with a powerful kick, but Yuri blocks it. But the thug follows with a crushing punch enhanced by the brass knuckles. The blow lands cleanly, slicing open Yuri's face. Seeing the injury, his friends call out his name in alarm. Cobra's men block them from interfering. Cobra warns everyone not to ruin his show. Despite his injuries, Yuri tells his friends to stay back as he will finish the fight alone. Although worried, they respect his decision. Focused, Yuri prepares to counterattack. Before he can move, the white-haired thug drives a devastating punch into his stomach. The impact makes Yuri spit a large amount of blood onto the floor. Mocking him, the thug asks how someone so weak ever thought he could challenge Cobra.